Poor boy. Sat alone at his birthday table. By sunset, 400 Harleys rolled up with cake. Mason Carter didn't blow out the candle because there was nobody to make a wish in front of. The flame wobbled in the wind, lighting a paper plate, a plastic fork, and 3 empty folding chairs on the sidewalk outside Bell's Diner. A crooked sign, ripped from the back of a cereal box, leaned against the salt shaker. "It's my birthday. You can sit if you want." He kept his hands under the table so people wouldn't see them shaking. His knees bounced anyway. The whole setup looked like something you'd build for a kid you cared about, if you only had $5 and a prayer. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching this from. Bell's Diner was the kind of place where the coffee tasted burnt and the booths were patched with duct tape. It sat on the corner where Main Street pinched into one lane, forcing every car to slow at the stop sign. Mason picked it because it was the only place in Ballar where you couldn't pretend you didn't see someone. He'd scrubbed the folding table at the gas station sink until his fingers went numb. He'd wiped the chairs down with paper towels until the plastic squeaked. He'd even tried to flatten his thrift store shirt with a warm soda bottle because he didn't own an iron. The cleanest version of him sat there now, facing 3 empty seats like they were a promise. A sedan slowed at the stop sign. A man in a work vest stared at the candle, then looked away and drove on. 2 high school kids walked by, saw the sign, and laughed like it was a joke made for them. One of them bumped a chair with his hip on purpose, making it scrape the concrete. Mason straightened it without looking up. Inside, dishes clinked, and the bell above the door chimed every few minutes. Every time it rang, Mason's head snapped toward it. Not her, not her, not her. His mom, Jenna, had promised. 5 o'clock, baby. We'll do it right this year. She'd slipped her last $5 bill into his pocket that morning. Mason used it on 1 cupcake from the grocery bakery. Vanilla, cheap blue frosting, 1 tiny candle. That was the whole celebration. That was all he had. The rest of the day had been spent walking in circles, making sure he didn't get sent home early from school for not having lunch money again. He checked the time on the diner's wall clock through the front window. 4:47. Still early. He could handle early. A woman with a stroller stopped at the curb. Her little girl pointed at the table. "Mommy, birthday." The woman's eyes met Mason's for a split second. Something softened there. And then the woman tugged the stroller along like she'd touched a hot stove. The girl looked back over her shoulder and waved anyway. Mason lifted his hand. His wave was small. Careful. Like he was afraid it might get him in trouble. Break. At 4:56, a man came out of the diner to smoke. He stood under the awning, scrolling his phone, and stared at Mason like he was a stray dog that had learned to sit too close to the door. "Your parents know you're out here?" the man asked. "My mom does," Mason said. "She works inside." The man snorted and blew smoke to the side. "Yeah? Well, don't ask people for money." "I'm not," Mason said quickly. I just set the table." The man's eyes flicked to the sign. He scoffed like the words offended him and went back inside without another look. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat and forced his mouth into a smile anyway. He practiced it the way he practiced not flinching when kids at school called him dirt. A smile that said, "It's fine. I'm fine. This is normal." It wasn't. Break. Right at 5, the bell chimed and Mason's heart jumped so hard it hurt. A waitress stepped out carrying a tray of drinks for the patio table. Not Jenna. The waitress was young, hair in a messy bun, name tag that read Kayla. She took one look at Mason's setup and froze. She didn't laugh. She didn't look away. She set the tray down on a ledge and walked to his table like she'd made a decision. "Hey," she said quietly. "Is it really your birthday?" Mason nodded, throat tight. "Yes, ma'am." Kayla frowned at the empty chairs. "Where's your mom?" "She's supposed to be here," Mason said. He hated how small his voice sounded. Kayla's eyes darted to the diner window, to the manager, to the street. Then she reached for a glass of water from her tray and set it in front of Mason. "Drink that," she said. "It's hot out." He didn't want to look needy, but his mouth was dry. He took a sip. The cold water shocked him awake. Kayla's lips pressed together. "I can't sit. Boss will lose it." She glanced at the chairs again. "But Happy birthday, okay? Mason tried to answer. All that came out was, thank you. Kayla hesitated, then slid one extra straw still in its wrapper onto the table like it was a gift. She gave him a small nod and hurried back inside, shoulders tense like she'd just committed a crime. The water in the straw sat there like evidence someone had seen him. Then 5 became 5:07, and Jenna still didn't come. Mason pulled out his cheap phone, cracked screen, prepaid plan. He typed with his thumbs. You comin'? He stared at the message. No reply. He sent another. I'm here by diner. The dots never appeared. No scene. Nothing. Mason stared at the cupcake until the blue frosting looked gray. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper plate, over and over, like the motion could keep him from cracking. Break. At 5:18, the police cruiser came back. It slowed the same way it had before, like it was enjoying itself. It stopped at the sign again. The window slid down. Deputy Klein leaned out, chewing gum. Told you to move, Klein said. Mason stood up fast, hands clenched at his sides. My mom works inside. She said she'd be here. Klein's eyes flicked to the diner, unimpressed. This ain't a sidewalk party. It's just, Mason swallowed. It's my birthday. Klein smirked. Yeah? And? The word hit like a slap. And what? And you don't get to have one. And you don't get to sit where people can see you. Mason felt his face burn. He stared at the deputy's badge like it was the only safe place to look. Klein drummed his fingers on the door again. You want trouble, kid? No, sir? Then pack it up. Mason's fingers twitched toward the candle. For a second, he pictured himself grabbing the cupcake and running, just to keep the flame alive somewhere nobody could laugh at it. But he didn't move, because leaving meant admitting the empty chairs were right. Klein's gaze dropped to Mason's collar again. The chain, the tiny bump under the fabric. What's that you keep grabbing? Klein asked. Mason's hand shot up, covering it. Nothing. Klein stared a moment longer, then chuckled like he'd won and rolled his window up. The cruiser eased away, slow and satisfied, like it had done its job. Mason sat back down, breathing too fast, trying not to cry. Break. The sun kept falling anyway. 5:24 became 5:36, then 5:44. Cars came and went. People ate, people laughed. Someone inside the diner clapped when a birthday song started for a table in the back, loud, cheerful, careless. Mason heard it through the glass and felt something in him go thin. Kayla came out once more to empty an ashtray and gave Mason a quick look. Sympathy, worry, helplessness. She didn't stop this time. The manager was watching. Mason kept staring at the door like his eyes could pull his mom into existence. He leaned forward, inhaled, and decided he'd blow the candle out alone. A wish still counted, right? Even if nobody saw it? Then the diner door slammed open hard enough to make the bell above it clang like an alarm. Martha, one of the cooks, rushed out, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes too wide. Baby, she said, you need to come inside. Right now? Mason stood so fast his chair screeched. Is my mom here? Martha opened her mouth, but the answer didn't come clean. They said she left, Martha whispered. Said she had to meet somebody, but she didn't clock out. She didn't take her purse. Mason's throat went tight. That's not... She wouldn't... Through the window, he saw 2 officers at the counter talking low with the manager. Deputy Klein was one of them. When Klein glanced out and saw Mason standing there, he nodded once like he'd been waiting for this. Mason turned back to his table like it could explain what was happening. The candle still burned. The chairs still sat empty. The signs still begged strangers to care. He sat down hard because his legs suddenly forgot how to hold him. The sun pressed against the horizon, bleeding orange across the street. And then, faint at first, like thunder far away, a low rumble rolled down Main Street. Not a car, not a truck. Something heavier, something that made the diner glass tremble. Mason's candle flame bent sideways in a wind that hadn't been there a second before. He stood up, eyes locked on the far end of the road as the rumble multiplied, growing louder, closer. A single headlight crested the hill and aimed straight for his lonely little table. It rolled up to the curb and went silent. The The bike sat there like it had been dropped out of the sky. Black paint, wide bars, a headlight that had just swallowed Mason's whole table in one white stare. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, a sound like a clock counting down. The rider didn't move for a second. Then, his boot hit the pavement. He stood up slow, not in a hurry, not trying to prove anything, yet the whole sidewalk seemed to shrink around him anyway. Tall, heavy shoulders, a leather vest over a dark shirt, patches stitched so clean they looked like they'd been pressed on with heat. No helmet, just close-cropped hair and a beard that made his face look carved instead of grown. His eyes slid to the candle, then the empty chairs, then Mason. Mason didn't know why his first thought was, he looks like someone who doesn't ask twice. The man stepped closer. He stopped at the edge of the table, careful not to bump it, like the little setup mattered, like it was real. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. "Mason," Mason said, voice thin. The man nodded once. "Happy birthday, Mason." Mason didn't answer. His brain couldn't decide if this was kindness or a setup. Before he could breathe again, another rumble rolled up the street, then another. 2 headlights appeared at the hill, then 4, then 10. Then the road filled with moving light, motorcycles cresting like a wave that just kept rising. People spilled out of the diner without meaning to. A couple at the window stood up. Phones came out. Someone said, "What the hell?" like the word was all they had. The first rider didn't look back. He kept his attention on Mason, steady as a hand on a shoulder. Mason's candle flame bent again, trembling hard now. One by one, bikes pulled in and lined the curb, then spilled into the side street, then stacked at the intersection. Harleys, choppers, baggers with saddlebags, engines thumping in different rhythms until it became one wall of sound that pressed against Mason's chest. It wasn't 5 bikes, it wasn't 20, it was a flood, and it didn't stop. Men and women climbed off, some older, some young, all wearing vests with the same emblem on the back. Some had tattoos that crawled up their necks. Some looked like they could have been construction workers or mechanics if they weren't standing there in a formation that felt deliberate even when it wasn't. Mason's mouth went dry. 400. He didn't know how he knew the number. He just felt it in the way the street disappeared under chrome and rubber. The first man finally turned his head as if listening to the engine settle, then looked back down at Mason. "You here alone?" he asked. Mason's throat worked. "My mom's inside. She's supposed to be." The man's gaze flicked to Bell's diner, to the officers inside, to Deputy Klein, who was now pushing out through the door with the manager behind him. Klein's face tightened the moment he saw the bikes. Not fear, anger, like he'd just been challenged in public. Klein strode across the sidewalk, hand near his belt. "You!" Klein barked, pointing at Mason like the boy was the problem. "I told you to pack it up." Mason flinched. "Sir, The biker stepped half a pace forward. Not a lunge, not a threat, just a wall. Klein stopped short, looking up. "What's this?" Klein said, trying to sound like he owned the air. "Some kind of show?" The biker didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile either. "It's a kid's birthday," he said. Klein laughed once, sharp. "That kid's been loitering all afternoon. I'm not having this circus in my town." Mason's candle flickered as a gust pushed between bodies. Behind the biker, more riders were dismounting, spreading out, taking up space, not surrounding Klein, not cornering him. But they were there. And Klein knew it. His eyes darted from patch to patch, counting like his brain was trying to decide how fast a bad decision could get him killed. "You need to clear out," Klein said louder so the diner crowd could hear. "Right now," the biker finally answered with something that made the sidewalk go quiet. "Name's Duke." Klein's jaw tightened. "I don't care what your name is." Duke's eyes didn't leave him. "You should." A rider near the curb murmured something, and another one chuckled under his breath. It wasn't mocking. It was like they'd heard the same line 100 times and knew how it ended. Klein straightened, pushing his chest out. "This is a public street." "It is," Duke said, "and that kid's sitting on it, with a cupcake." Mason stared at the cupcake like it might save him. It looked ridiculous now, blue frosting against leather vests and badges. Klein stepped toward Mason, reaching for the back of his chair. "Mason, get up. You're coming inside." Mason froze. He didn't want to be touched, not by Klein, not right now, not when his mom wasn't where she was supposed to be and his birthday had turned into this. Duke's hand moved, fast but controlled, landing on the chair back before Klein's fingers could close on it. "Don't," Duke said. The word was quiet. It hit harder than Klein's shouting. Klein's face reddened. "You just put your hand on police property?" Duke blinked once, unimpressed. "That's a chair." Klein tried to yank it anyway. Duke didn't let it move. For a moment, it was just two hands on plastic, the whole town holding its breath. Then Klein leaned closer, voice dropping low, poisonous. "You don't know who you're messing with," he hissed. Duke leaned just as close, tone still even. "I do." Klein's eyes flicked down. He'd noticed it too, the thin chain at Mason's neck. The way Mason kept his hand pressed over it like it was a heartbeat he could hold. Duke's gaze followed that movement, sharp, focused, like a hunter recognizing a footprint. "Mason," Duke said, not looking at Klein anymore. "What's under your shirt?" Mason's fingers tightened. "It's mine." Duke's jaw worked once, like he was swallowing something that didn't want to go down. "What is it?" Duke repeated. Mason hesitated. The chain was old, cheap metal worn smooth. The pendant was small and flat, a simple oval that didn't look like much, unless you knew what it meant. His mom had given it to him when he was little and told him never to take it off, not for showers, not for school, not for anyone. Mason pulled it out just enough for the oval to catch the dying sunlight. Duke went still, not tense, not angry, just stopped. A couple of the bikers behind him saw it too, and their faces changed. The laughter died. The casual leaning turned into attention. Klein noticed the shift and didn't like it. "What the hell is that?" Klein demanded. Duke didn't answer him. He stared at the pendant like it had reached up and grabbed him by the throat. "That's—" Duke started, then paused, choosing his words like they mattered. "Where did you get that, kid?" "My mom," Mason said. "She said it was from my dad." Duke's eyes snapped to Mason's face. "Your dad's name?" Mason swallowed. "I never met him." Duke held Mason's gaze anyway, refusing to accept it. "What did she tell you?" Mason's voice came out rougher than he expected. "She said he died before I was born, that's all." Duke's nostrils flared. He looked past Mason toward the diner window again, where the manager was pretending not to watch, and Kayla was frozen near the counter like she couldn't decide whether to run or pray. Duke's voice dropped. "Your mom's Jenna Carter?" Mason's stomach turned. "How do you know that?" Duke didn't answer right away. He straightened, finally letting go of the chair. Not backing down, just shifting his weight like he was done with small talk. He turned to the nearest rider, a woman with silver hair braided down her back and a calm face that didn't match the scar along her jaw. "Call it in," Duke said. She pulled out her phone instantly. Klein stepped forward, angry again. "Call what in?" Duke looked at him like Klein was a fly that wouldn't stop circling his drink. "A missing person," Duke said, "and a problem." Klein's hand went to his radio. "Sheriff's gonna love this," he muttered, loud enough for Duke to hear. "You think you can roll in here and—" The word sheriff landed like a key turning. Duke's eyes sharpened. "Where is Sheriff Grady?" Duke asked. Klein's mouth twitched. "Probably doing his job." Duke nodded once, slow. "Good. Tell him Duke Mercer is standing on Main Street. Tell him I'm looking for Jenna." Klein's expression shifted, just for a second. Not fear, something worse, recognition. He recovered fast and lifted his chin. "I don't know what games you people play, but you're not intimidating anyone." Duke didn't smile. "I'm not here to intimidate," he said. "I'm here because your deputy just told a kid to pack up his birthday table while his mother's missing." Mason's chest tightened at the word missing. Martha's voice came back in his head. She didn't clock out. She didn't take her purse. Mason looked toward the diner again, toward the counter where the officers were still talking low. He saw Kayla wipe her hands on her apron again and again, like she was trying to erase panic off her skin. Mason's voice cracked. "My mom isn't missing. She's just late." Duke turned back to him. His expression softened, but only in the eyes. Everything else stayed hard. "I hope you're right," Duke said. "But if you're not, we're not wasting time." A big man from the bike stepped forward holding something white and square. A cake box. Mason blinked at it like his brain couldn't process that detail in the middle of all this. The big man set the box gently on Mason's table, right beside the cupcake like it belonged there. The cardboard was clean, printed with a bakery logo from the next county over, expensive enough that Mason had only ever seen those boxes through other people's hands. Duke nodded toward it. "Make room," he said. Mason didn't move. The candle was still burning, tiny, stubborn. The box lid lifted and the smell hit Mason so hard his throat tightened. Real cake, chocolate, frosting thick like a blanket, piped letters in neat white icing. "Happy birthday, Mason." Mason's eyes stung. He didn't know why that was the thing that broke him. Maybe because it proved someone had known, someone had planned, someone had cared enough to get his name right. Klein took a step back, suddenly aware that the diner crowd was watching him now, not the bikers. People were filming, people were whispering, people were asking each other who Duke Mercer was. Klein's radio crackled. He pressed it, voice too controlled. "Sheriff," he said, "we got a situation." Duke leaned in toward Mason again, low enough that only the boy could hear. "Stay by that table," Duke said. "Don't go anywhere with a badge or without one unless I say so. You understand me?" Mason's breath shook. "Why?" Duke's gaze dropped to the pendant once more. "Because your mom didn't leave you on purpose," Duke said, "and somebody in this town wants you to think she did." Klein's hand closed around Mason's shoulder from behind, firm, claiming. "Mason," Klein said, voice suddenly sweet in a way that made Mason's skin crawl. "Let's go inside. Right now." Mason turned his head and saw Duke's eyes go cold. Mason felt Deputy Klein's fingers clamp down like a promise that hurt. It wasn't a gentle touch. It wasn't guidance. It was ownership. Thumb digging into the soft spot above Mason's collarbone, steering him away from the table as if the chairs, the candle, the cake, the whole moment belonged to the street and not to him. "Inside," Klein said, still using that sugary voice that made Mason's stomach twist. "We'll call your mom. We'll get you home." Home wasn't a place Mason wanted to hear from Klein's mouth. Mason's feet slid on the concrete. His hand shot to the locket again without thinking, clutching it through the fabric like it could anchor him. And then Duke moved. It was so fast Mason barely saw the beginning of it. Duke's hand came up, not striking, not swinging, just closing around Klein's wrist with a grip that looked almost casual until Klein's face changed. "Let go," Duke said. Klein's smile collapsed. "Back off." Duke didn't raise his voice. That was the terrifying part. The calm stayed in him like a locked door. "You put your hands on a child," Duke said. "You do it again. I break your fingers one by one." The sidewalk went quiet in a way that wasn't natural. Even the diner crowd seemed to stop breathing. Phones were still up, but the whispering died, replaced by the soft clicking of recording. Klein tried to pull away. Duke didn't allow it. The tendons in Klein's neck tightened. He gave a quick glance toward his cruiser, toward the bikes, toward the patches, doing math he didn't like. "This is a police matter," Klein said, louder now for his audience. "That kid is coming with me." Duke's eyes didn't leave him. "On what charge?" Klein's mouth opened, then shut again. He looked at Mason like Mason was the charge. "Loitering," Klein snapped. Duke stared. "It's a sidewalk." Klein's jaw worked. "Vagrancy." Duke's expression didn't change, but something in his stare sharpened like a blade being taken out of a sheath. "You want to call a kid vagrant on his birthday?" Duke asked, "in front of half this town's cameras?" Klein's gaze flicked to the phones. A couple people lowered them, guilty. Most didn't. Duke leaned in slightly. His voice dropped low enough that Mason had to strain to hear, but the meaning was clear. "You're trying to move him because you don't want him where people can see him," Duke said. "Now tell me why." Klein's cheeks reddened. He yanked his arm again, harder. Duke finally let go, only because he chose to. Klein stumbled half a step, caught himself, then snapped, "You are obstructing." A biker behind Duke, the big man who'd set down the cake, shifted his weight forward. Another one, a lean guy with a camera strapped to his chest like a body cam, angled his lens straight at Klein and didn't blink. Duke didn't even look back. He just extended his hand toward Mason without taking his eyes off the deputy. Mason hesitated. Duke's hand stayed there, steady. Mason slid his small fingers into Duke's palm. The contact was firm, warm. It made Mason's chest loosen in a way that felt wrong, like relief he didn't deserve. Duke guided him 2 steps behind, placing his body between Mason and Klein without making it dramatic. Then he spoke over his shoulder. "Raven," he said, and the silver-haired woman appeared at his side instantly. She crouched to Mason's height. Her eyes were calm and sharp, like she'd already decided the world didn't get to scare her anymore. "Stay with me," she told Mason. "If anybody in a badge tries to touch you, you step behind me. You got it?" Mason nodded. Raven's gaze slid to the locket at Mason's neck, then back to his face. "What's your mom's name?" she asked softly. "Jenna," Mason whispered. "Jenna Carter." Raven's jaw tightened like she'd just bitten something hard. "Okay," she said. "Okay, honey." Duke turned and walked toward Bell's diner. He didn't run. He didn't charge. He just walked like the building owed him answers. 2 bikers fell in behind him. Not a swarm, an escort. The manager saw them coming and stepped into the doorway, arms spread, face pale and furious. "You can't come in here," the manager shouted. "You'll scare my customers." Duke stopped in the threshold. The diner's bell chimed once, bright and stupid, like it had no idea what it was ringing for. Duke's eyes swept the room. Booths full of people frozen mid-bite. Coffee mugs paused halfway to lips. Kayla behind the counter, hands braced on the edge like she needed something to hold on to. Martha near the kitchen door, her face strained with worry. Deputy Klein pushing in behind them, ready to make it a show. Duke spoke in a voice that carried without shouting. "I'm not here for your customers," he said. "I'm here for Jenna Carter." The manager blinked too fast. "I don't know what you're talking about." Kayla's eyes flashed to Martha. Martha's hand went to her mouth. Duke's gaze caught that movement. He pointed gently, not accusing, calling. "You," Duke said, nodding at Martha. "You know." Martha flinched like the spotlight burned. She looked at the manager, then at the officers, then at Duke. Her hands trembled. Martha started, and the manager snapped. "Martha, shut up." Duke's head tilted slightly. The calm didn't leave him, but it tightened. "Let her talk," Duke said. The manager lifted his chin. "This is my business." Duke stepped fully inside. The air changed. Not because he threatened anyone, because a man like that simply entering your space made you remember you weren't in control of everything. Duke looked at the manager and spoke as if explaining something to a child. "Your employee's missing," he said. "This town's deputy just tried to drag her kid off a sidewalk. You can either tell me what happened, or you can keep lying while everybody in here records you doing it." He gestured once toward the phones in the booths. People were filming, yes, but now they were filming the manager too. The manager's eyes darted and he swallowed. Klein shoved his way forward. "You don't have permission." Duke turned his head slightly, like he was acknowledging a mosquito. "Your deputy already stepped over the line outside," Duke said. "You want to push it inside too?" Klein's face twitched. "You're not in charge here," Duke nodded. "No, I'm not." He looked around again, landing his eyes on Kayla. "You're Jenna's friend?" Kayla stiffened. I work here." Duke's gaze softened by a fraction. "Where'd she go?" Kayla's mouth opened. The manager barked, "Kayla, don't—" Martha broke first. "She didn't go anywhere," Martha blurted, voice cracking. "Not on purpose. She left her purse in the back. She left her apron. She didn't even take her tips." A hush fell over the diner like a blanket. Mason stood just inside the doorway now with Raven, watching from the side. Seeing adults speak the wordless fear out loud made it real in a way Mason couldn't swallow. Duke's eyes narrowed. "Show me," he said. The manager tried to block him. "You're not going in my back area." Duke didn't touch him, didn't shove him. He just kept walking, and the manager's courage crumpled under the simple fact that Duke didn't care about his posture. Klein stepped forward, hand on his belt. "Stop!" The lean biker with the chest camera moved 2 inches to the side so his lens caught Klein's hand. Raven's head turned sharply. The whole room felt like it was leaning toward a cliff. Duke stopped in front of the swinging kitchen door and looked back at Klein. "You want to arrest somebody?" Duke asked. "Arrest the person who took Jenna." Klein's lips pulled into a thin line. "You're making accusations." "I'm making demands," Duke said. He pushed through the kitchen door. Martha led them behind the counter, through a narrow hall that smelled like grease and old mop water. The back office door was slightly ajar. Martha didn't touch it. She pointed like she was afraid it might bite. "She keeps her purse right there," Martha whispered. Duke stepped in. The office was small. filing cabinets, a desk with a cheap fan, a bulletin board with schedules and flyers. On the floor beside the desk was a woman's purse, half open, straps twisted. Mason's mom's purse. Mason's chest tightened so hard he couldn't breathe. "Mom," he whispered without meaning to. Raven's hand came to his shoulder. "I know," she murmured. Duke crouched and looked at the purse without touching it, as if treating it like a crime scene. His eyes scanned. A cracked phone lay near the trash bin, screen shattered spiderweb style. Next to it, a smear of something dark on the tile, too thick to be coffee. Martha made a strangled sound. "I told them," she said. "I told the sheriff's office. They said she probably took off." Duke's head lifted slowly. "The sheriff's office said that," he repeated. Martha nodded, tears rising. "Deputy Klein said it. He said she's got a history of drama." Mason's fingers dug into the locket so hard it hurt. He didn't know what history of drama meant, but he knew his mom didn't leave him. Not like this. Duke's jaw clenched. "Any cameras?" Duke asked. The manager's voice came from the hallway, defensive. "Camera's been busted for months." Duke didn't look at him. "You got a DVR," the manager scoffed. "No." The lean biker stepped in behind Duke, eyes flicking around like he was reading the room in code. He pointed at a dusty shelf above a filing cabinet. A black box sat there, half hidden behind a stack of paperwork. "Looks like a DVR," the biker said calmly. The manager went pale. "That's not—" Duke stood. "Bring it." Klein appeared at the office door, face tight with anger. "You can't take property." Duke turned, holding Klein's stare. "It's evidence." Klein's jaw worked. "Evidence of what?" Duke took one step closer, voice low and deadly controlled. "Evidence that you're lying." Klein's eyes flicked to Mason behind Raven, a quick glance, like checking if the kid was watching, like checking if the kid mattered. Then Klein forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You people think you run things because you show up with engines." Duke didn't react to the insult. He lifted his chin toward the smashed phone on the floor. "Whose phone is that?" Duke asked. Martha whispered. "Jenna's." Klein shrugged. "Maybe she dropped it." Duke's eyes narrowed slightly. "And her purse?" Klein shrugged again. "Maybe she forgot." Duke leaned in just enough to make Klein stiffen. "And the blood?" Duke asked. Klein's face tightened. "That could be ketchup," Klein said. Mason made a sound, half sob, half gasp. Raven drew him back behind her shoulder, blocking his view. "Don't look," she murmured. "Don't." But Mason had already seen it. Ketchup didn't look like that. Ketchup didn't happen next to a broken phone and an abandoned purse and a mother who didn't show up for her kid's birthday. Duke straightened. "Kayla," he called out. Kayla appeared in the doorway, eyes wet, hands shaking. "Yes?" she whispered. Duke's voice softened again, just slightly. "Did Jenna say anything today? Anything strange?" Kayla swallowed. She was scared." The manager snapped. "Kayla!" Kayla flinched, then burst out anyway, words tumbling like they'd been trapped behind her teeth all day. "She kept checking the window," Kayla said. "She kept saying she had to make it right before tonight. She told me if she didn't come back, I had to give something to—" Kayla's eyes flicked to Duke's vest. "To the man on the black bike." Silence. Duke didn't blink. "What something?" Kayla's hand slid into her apron pocket. Klein's eyes sharpened like a dog smelling meat. "Kayla," Klein snapped, "do not hand over—" Kayla pulled out a white envelope, edges crumpled like she'd squeezed it all day. Mason's stomach dropped. He recognized his mom's handwriting on the front. "Duke? If you're reading this, I couldn't outrun them." Klein lunged, not fast enough. Raven moved like she'd been built for this. She stepped between Klein and Kayla without touching him, just filling the space. The big biker with the cake box shifted 2 inches so Klein's path closed. The lean biker's camera stayed trained on Klein's hands. Klein froze, eyes wild. "You're obstructing," Klein spat. Duke took the envelope from Kayla carefully, like it might explode. He held it up at chest level so the whole room could see. "You want to stop me?" Duke asked Klein. "Do it on camera." Klein's mouth opened. He looked around at the diners, at the phones, at the patches, at Mason's small face peeking from behind Raven's shoulder. Then, his voice dropped into something that was no longer meant for the crowd. "You don't know what you're stepping into," Klein hissed. Duke's eyes went colder than Mason thought eyes could go. "I do," Duke said. "That's why I came." He slid a finger under the flap of the envelope and opened it. Inside was a small flash drive taped to a folded piece of paper. Duke unfolded the paper. His eyes moved once across the lines. Then he stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt. Duke's face didn't change the way Mason expected. No shock, no anger, no visible panic. It went blank, like every emotion in him had been locked behind steel. He lowered the note slowly. Mason saw a single line at the bottom in his mother's handwriting, big enough to read from where he stood. Mason is Ray Mercer's son. For a second, nobody spoke. Not the manager, not the diners, not even Deputy Klein, who'd been running his mouth like the room belonged to him. Mason stared at the words on the paper until they stopped looking like words and started looking like a mistake. His heart thumped hard enough he could hear blood in his ears. Ray Mercer's son. He didn't even know a Ray. He'd never heard the name in his life. His mother had never said it, not once, not when bills piled up, not when he asked about his dad, not when the other kids made jokes about him not having one. Duke folded the note once, then again, slow and careful. Like if he moved too fast, something would break that couldn't be fixed. Klein's voice finally found a way out, sharp and urgent. "Hand that over," he snapped. Duke didn't look at him. He slid the note into the inside pocket of his vest like it was a living thing. Then he lifted the flash drive taped to the paper and held it between two fingers. "This?" Duke asked, calm. Klein stepped forward. "That's property. That's evidence. You have no right." "Evidence," Duke repeated, finally turning his head. "We agree on something." Klein's eyes flashed. "Give it to me." Duke's stare didn't blink. "No." Klein's jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. He glanced at the manager like he expected backup. The manager's face was white. He wasn't built for this kind of heat. Klein reached for his radio. "Sheriff, now." The radio crackled back, faint in the diner noise. Duke could hear the strain in the deputy's voice and the way he tried to hide it. "We got Duke Mercer in Bell's Diner, with a crowd. He's interfering in an investigation." The words interfering sounded rehearsed, like they'd used them before when things got messy. Duke held the flash drive up so the camera phones could catch it. "Everybody recording?" Duke asked the diner, not as a joke. A couple people nodded. A man in the corner raised his phone higher. Duke nodded once. "Good." He turned slightly toward Kayla. "You got a computer in that office?" Kayla blinked, frightened. "The manager's." "Does it work?" Kayla swallowed. "Yes." Duke handed the flash drive to the lean biker with the chest camera. "Plug it in. Don't play anything until I'm watching." The biker nodded and moved fast, already stepping toward the back office like he'd done it 100 times. Another writer followed him, eyes scanning the hallway. Klein's voice shot up. "You can't just... That's tampering." Duke finally gave him a look that made Klein's words die halfway. "You told this kid's mother took off," Duke said, "while her purse and phone are on the floor and there's blood on tile, so you don't get to tell me what tampering looks like." Klein's face turned a deep, ugly red. "Watch your mouth," Duke's voice lowered. "Watch your hands." Mason stood frozen near the doorway, Raven in front of him like a shield. The big biker stood to Mason's other side now, too, not touching him, just present, like the space around Mason had become something guarded. Mason kept staring at Duke, trying to connect the man to the word Ray in his head. Mercer, Mercer, Mercer. He took a step forward before he could stop himself. "Who's Ray?" Mason asked. The room seemed to pull tighter. Duke didn't answer right away. He turned his head, eyes landing on Mason like he'd just remembered there was a child in the middle of this. His face softened by a fraction. "Ray was family," Duke said. Mason's voice cracked. "Was he my dad?" Duke's jaw worked once. "Yes." The word hit Mason like a shove. His knees went light. He reached for the edge of a booth to steady himself. "No," Mason whispered. "My mom said he died." Duke's gaze stayed steady. "He did." Mason's throat tightened so hard it hurt. "Then why would she write that now?" Duke's eyes slid to Klein for half a second, then back. "Because she knew she wouldn't get a second chance," Duke said quietly, "and because she needed me to understand what was at stake." "What's at stake?" Mason asked. Duke didn't answer. He looked like he wanted to say something simple, something that wouldn't make Mason's world fall apart any more than it already had. But the truth didn't come in simple pieces. "We find your mom," Duke said instead. "That's first." A bootstep sounded in the hallway. The lean biker popped back into the diner, face tight. "Got it," he said. "There's video." Klein stiffened. "Video of what?" The biker didn't even look at him. He looked at Duke. "You need to see it." Duke turned back to Mason. "Raven," he said low. "Take him outside. Keep him close. Don't let anybody separate you." Mason's eyes went wide. "No, I'm staying." Raven crouched, her voice firm but gentle. "We're staying where he can see you, honey. But we're not staying in a room where grown men are about to do something stupid." Mason swallowed hard. He wanted to fight her. He wanted to glue himself to the floor. He wanted his mom to appear in the doorway and laugh and say it was all a mistake. Instead, he let Raven guide him toward the door. As they stepped out, Mason saw the street again. Bikes everywhere, patches everywhere, a crowd forming at the curb, whispering, pointing, filming. Some faces nervous, some faces hungry for drama, some faces angry, like they thought all of this was somehow Mason's fault for sitting at a table where people could see him. Sheriff's cruisers started appearing at the far end of Main Street. 1, 2, 3, lights on, no sirens, like they didn't want the town to notice how fast they were moving. The chaos. The big cake sat unopened now. The chaos. The big cake sat unopened now. Frosting letters still perfect. "Happy birthday, Mason." He didn't feel like a kid. He felt like bait. Inside, through the diner window, Mason saw Duke step into the back office with 2 riders behind him. Klein followed, trying to force his way in. Then the blinds in the office window dropped, cutting the view. Mason's stomach rolled. "What are they doing?" he whispered. Raven didn't lie. "Looking at what your mom left." The sheriff's first cruiser stopped hard at the curb. A thick man with gray hair climbed out. Sheriff Grady. Mason had seen him at parades, smiling, shaking hands like he was a politician. Tonight, he wasn't smiling. He walked straight for the diner with 2 deputies flanking him and a look on his face like he was about to crush something. He didn't glance at Mason's table, didn't glance at the cake, didn't glance at the kid whose mother was missing. His eyes locked on the patches. "Duke Mercer," Sheriff Grady called out as he approached the entrance, "you're going to clear this street right now." Duke didn't come out. Grady reached the door and yanked it open. The bell over the door chimed, bright and stupid again. "Where is he?" Grady barked. Inside, people shrank back. The manager stammered. Klein's voice rose fast, feeding the sheriff a version of events that sounded practiced. Grady shoved past them toward the back hallway. Raven shifted Mason half a step behind her, her eyes following the sheriff like a hawk. The seconds stretched. Then the diner's back door flew open. A biker stepped out fast, scanning left and right like he expected an attack. He spoke into his phone, voice clipped. "They're here. He's watching the file." Mason's breath caught. The file, the flash drive. Then another cruiser rolled up behind the first. Then another. Grady's deputies spread across the sidewalk, hands on belts, setting a perimeter like they were preparing for a raid. A couple bikers quietly moved too, not aggressive, just positioning, standing at corners, stepping in front of Mason's table without touching it, blocking sightlines like they'd done it their whole lives. Mason's pulse hammered. He looked up at Raven. "Why do they need so many cops?" Raven's eyes didn't leave the diner. "Because they're scared," she said. "Of Duke?" Raven's mouth tightened. "No, of what's on that drive." Inside, something crashed. Metal on tile. Voices spiked. Then Duke stepped out of the diner back hallway into the main room, moving fast now. The calm finally sharpened into urgency. Mason couldn't hear the words through the glass, but he saw Duke's face. The blankness was gone. Now there was fury held on a leash. Sheriff Grady got in his way, chest out, barking. Duke didn't shout back. He leaned in, spoke close, and Grady's expression changed in a way that made Mason's stomach drop. Not anger. Panic. Grady's head snapped toward Klein, and for a split second, Klein looked like a kid caught stealing. Then Grady turned and shouted something toward the front, an order. Deputies immediately started moving, faster, tighter. Raven cursed under her breath, the first time Mason had heard her lose control. "Move," she told Mason. "Now." She pulled him backward, away from the table, away from the curb, toward the line of bikes. Mason stumbled. "What?" Raven's voice went low and hard. They're about to take you." Mason's blood went cold. At that exact moment, the diner's front door slammed open and Duke stepped out onto the sidewalk. His eyes found Mason instantly. He started toward him, and a deputy on the far side of the street lifted his radio, speaking into it like he was calling a play. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled around the corner, slow and smooth. Not a town vehicle, not a cruiser. It stopped at the curb. The rear door opened, and two men got out who didn't wear badges. They looked straight at Mason, then they started walking. They didn't look like cops, and they didn't look like locals. Clean boots, dark jackets that were too plain to be fashion and too fitted to be workwear. No patches, no logos, no town police belt, no friendly small talk face. Just two men moving in sync, eyes locked on Mason like he was a package with a barcode. Raven shifted instantly, widening her stance. "Back up," she said, loud enough for them and low enough for Mason to feel the danger in it. The men didn't slow. One of them lifted a hand like he was calming a dog. "Easy. We're here for the child." Mason's stomach dropped. "Who are you?" The man smiled without warmth. "Protective Services. We're taking you somewhere safe." Raven didn't even blink. "You got a badge?" The man's hand moved toward his pocket, but he didn't pull anything out. He kept walking. "You don't need to see that," he said. "We're under the sheriff's direction." Mason's eyes snapped to Sheriff Grady. Grady was on the sidewalk near the diner entrance, talking fast to Deputy Klein and two deputies, trying to pretend this wasn't happening. But when Mason looked at him, Grady's eyes didn't hold his gaze. They slipped away like a lie. Duke saw it too. He was coming down the steps from the diner, shoulders squared, rage so controlled it looked like silence. "Stop," Duke said. The men kept moving. Raven's hand went behind her, touching Mason's shoulder. A signal. "Stay behind me." The first man reached for Mason anyway. Raven slapped his hand away, hard. The man's face twitched. "Don't make this difficult." Duke's voice cut in again, sharper. "I said stop." Sheriff Grady finally raised his voice, trying to take control. "Duke," Grady barked, "you're interfering. Those men are authorized. Step back." The second man stepped in close to Raven, crowding her space like he wanted to intimidate her without throwing a punch. He leaned down toward Mason as if Raven wasn't there. "Mason," he said, using the boy's name like it was a key. "Come with us, now." Mason's chest tightened. He didn't understand how strangers knew his name, but he understood the shape of fear. It was the same shape as when the lights got shut off at home, when Jenna's voice got too quiet, when she told him to lock the door no matter what. He backed up. His heel bumped a Harley tire. A biker behind the bike shifted, silent, and suddenly the men had patches on both sides of them. The first man's smile slipped. "Sir," he said to Duke, "this isn't your business." Duke's stare didn't move. "That kid is my business." The first man's jaw flexed. He made a quick decision, and Mason saw it in the way his shoulders tightened. The man lunged. His hand shot for Mason's arm. Everything happened at once. Raven swung her body in front of Mason and took the grab to her own forearm, twisting away. The man yanked, and Raven stumbled, still upright, still blocking. A biker grabbed the man's wrist and wrenched it down. The man hissed, tried to swing his other hand up, and the biker stepped into him, chest to chest, pinning him without throwing a punch. The second man reached into his jacket. Not for a badge. Mason saw a flash of metal and felt his blood turn to ice. Duke moved like a snapped chain. He crossed the distance in 2 steps and slammed his forearm into the second man's chest, knocking him back against the SUV door hard enough to make the door shudder. The metal object clattered to the pavement, something compact, ugly, not a gun, but not something you'd carry for paperwork either. A deputy shouted, "Hands! Everybody hands!" Phones surged higher. People screamed. The diner crowd poured out like the building was spitting them onto the sidewalk. Sheriff Grady stepped forward, hand on his own weapon now, eyes wild. "Duke, stand down!" he yelled. "You're assaulting. Your men tried to snatch a kid in front of 100 witnesses," Duke snapped, voice rising for the first time. "In front of cameras, in front of his birthday table." Grady's face went tight. "They're not my men." Duke took one slow step toward him. "Then why are you lying for them?" Klein pushed through the crowd, face sharp with hatred, pointing at Duke like he was calling a firing squad. "Arrest him!" Klein shouted. "Now! He's kidnapping the child. He's—" "Shut your mouth," Raven said, and her tone was so cold even Klein flinched. The first man, wrist-trapped, looked around, calculating. He saw the bikes, the patches, the phones, the civilians watching, and he realized brute force had failed. So he changed tactics. He lifted his free hand and shouted, "Kid's in danger! They're taking him! Sheriff, do something!" A couple people in the crowd gasped, uncertain, the way people do when a loud man tells them what to believe. Grady seized it. "That's enough," he barked. "Mason is coming with law enforcement for his protection." Duke's head snapped to him. "Protection?" Duke spat. "Your deputy called his mother a runaway while her blood is on tile." Grady's face hardened. "That's an investigation," Duke's voice dropped. "And your investigation just sent 2 men in an unmarked SUV to steal him." Grady's eyes flicked to the men, then away. Again. Mason's throat closed. He looked at Grady and realized in one awful clear moment that the sheriff was not confused. He was complicit. Raven's hand tightened on Mason's shoulder. "Duke," she said low, "we need to move him, now." Duke didn't hesitate. He turned his head slightly and spoke 2 words. "Lock it." The command rippled through the riders like electricity. Engines ignited, not all at once, layered, surrounding, a controlled thunder that swallowed the street. Bikes started to roll, forming a moving wall between Mason and the SUV. The crowd backed up as the heat and sound hit them. Raven bent down to Mason's ear. "You're going to run with me," she said. "Don't look at anybody. Don't stop." Mason's legs felt like they belonged to someone else. He nodded anyway. Duke grabbed the cake box off Mason's table with one hand, the flash drive pocket bulging under his vest, and with the other, he yanked the folding chairs out of the way like they were nothing. His eyes cut to Mason. "Move," he ordered. Raven pulled Mason into the gap between 2 bikes. The biker who'd pinned the first man released him in a single shove, sending him stumbling back. The man hit the SUV, then reached for the door handle. Too late. A line of Harleys rolled forward, blocking the SUV's front bumper. Another line slid behind it, boxing it in without touching it. The second man tried to step around, but a biker stepped into his path, expression flat. "No," the biker said. Grady cursed and barked to his deputies. "Get around them. Get the kid." Deputies surged forward and stopped when they realized they'd have to push through civilians with phones, then through a wall of motorcycles and bodies that were not moving. A deputy lifted his taser. Duke saw it, and his voice cut like a whip. "Don't." The deputy hesitated. Somebody in the crowd shouted, "This is insane." Somebody else shouted back, "They're taking the kid." Mason's chest heaved. He felt like the whole town had turned into hands reaching. Raven kept him moving, weaving between chrome and leather, past idling engines and boots on pavement. The noise was so loud it rattled his bones. A bike rolled up beside them, low seat, steady rider. The rider flipped up a spare helmet. "Hop!" Raven ordered. Mason froze for half a second. He'd never been on a motorcycle. He didn't even know how. Raven grabbed him under the arms, lifted him like he weighed nothing, and set him on the seat behind the rider. Mason's hands scrambled, finding the rider's vest clinging. Raven swung on behind Mason, wrapping an arm around his middle like a seatbelt made of bone and will. "Hold tight," she said. The rider glanced over his shoulder. "Ready?" Raven's eyes met Duke's across the chaos. Duke was still on the sidewalk, squared off with Grady, the cake box in his hand like a ridiculous trophy in a war zone. Behind Duke, bikers had formed a barrier in front of the diner entrance, keeping deputies from flooding out and trampling the crowd. Duke's gaze locked on Mason for one heartbeat. A promise. Then he nodded once. The rider eased the bike forward. Mason's stomach lurched. The bike slid between 2 Harleys, then into the moving line. The convoy started to roll, slow at first, then tightening, then accelerating as the street opened. Mason risked one look back. He saw the unmarked SUV rocking as the men inside shouted, pounding the glass. He saw Deputy Klein pushing against a biker's chest, screaming. He saw Sheriff Grady shouting into his radio, face twisted, his eyes tracking Mason like a hunter, tracking wounded prey. Then the line of bikes swallowed the view. They took a side street, then another, cutting behind the hardware store, past the closed laundromat, down an alley that smelled like dumpsters and hot asphalt. The convoy moved like it had practiced, bikes in front, bikes behind, bikes flanking, a living cage of chrome. Mason's cheeks stung from wind, his fingers cramped from gripping the vest. "What's happening?" he shouted, but his voice vanished into engine roar. Raven leaned close. "They tried to take you," she shouted into his ear. "That means your mom's alive, Mason. It means she matters." The words hit Mason in a way that wasn't comfort. It was terror dressed as hope. A siren wailed behind them, then another. Red and blue lights flashed at the end of the street, gaining. "Cops!" Mason yelled. Raven's voice stayed steel. "We keep moving." The convoy hit an intersection, and bikes split. Half the riders surged forward, the other half fanned out, blocking cross streets. A cruiser tried to cut in and got forced to brake as a row of Harleys drifted into its lane like a closing gate. No collision, no crash, just control. Mason's heart slammed. He didn't know if he should be grateful or sick. They hit the highway for a few seconds, just long enough to gain speed, then dropped off onto a service road by the river, where the trees swallowed the last daylight. That's when the ambush came. A pickup truck rolled out of a dirt lot ahead and swung sideways across the road, blocking it. Another vehicle, dark sedan, appeared behind them, cutting off the rear. Mason felt Raven tense. "Hold on," she said. The rider didn't panic. He slowed just enough, then turned sharply toward the shoulder where the grass dipped. The bike bounced hard. Mason cried out, gripping tighter. They shot off-road into tall weeds, engines choking as dirt and gravel sprayed. Other bikes followed, line breaking into a swarm, moving through the field like wolves scattering. Behind them, the pickup's driver climbed out, shouting, pointing. A pop cracked through the air. Mason flinched, ducking instinctively. Raven pressed him down. "Don't look!" she snapped. Another pop, then a different sound. Harleys gunning, roaring, pushing forward. The rider leaned the bike hard around a tree line and burst back onto a narrow paved lane that ran behind a storage yard. The convoy regrouped as if pulled by a magnet. A pair of bikes peeled off and boxed the dark sedan that had tried to block them. The sedan swerved, then stopped. Two bikers jumped off. Mason's bike didn't stop. Raven didn't let it. They kept moving until the trees opened onto an old industrial lot fenced with chain link. A low building sat there, windows dark, a couple floodlights on poles. The clubhouse. As the bikes poured in, the gates swung shut behind them. Gulping air like he'd been underwater. Gulping air like he'd been underwater. "What? What is this place?" he stammered. Raven didn't answer with words. She just turned him so he could see. Duke rolled into the yard on his own bike at the head of a cluster, still carrying the cake box. His face was grim now, and there was dried blood on one knuckle like he'd hit something without even noticing. Two other bikers dragged a man through the gate, one of the SUV men, wrists zip-tied, jacket dirty from being shoved down in the field. The man's eyes darted around, panic finally cracking his calm. Duke climbed off his bike, walked straight to Mason, and crouched so they were eye level. "You hurt?" Duke asked. Mason shook his head so fast it made him dizzy. "My mom." "I know," Duke said. He stood and turned to the captured man. The yard went quiet except for engines ticking as they cooled. Duke's voice carried without shouting. "Who sent you?" The man lifted his chin, trying to regain arrogance. "You're making a mistake." Duke stared at him like he was nothing. Then, Duke reached into his vest and pulled out the flash drive. He held it up in the floodlight. "You were on this," Duke said. "I watched the file. I saw you." The man's face flickered, one involuntary tell. Duke's voice went colder. "So I'll ask again. Who sent you?" The man swallowed. "I don't know what you think you saw." Duke nodded once, almost polite. He looked at Raven. "Phone," Duke said. Raven handed him a burner phone they'd taken off the man. Duke pressed a button and held it up to the man's face. "Unlock it." The man shook his head. "I can't." Duke stepped closer, lowering his voice into something that made Mason's stomach knot even from several feet away. "You can," Duke said. "Or you can explain to Mason why he's spending his birthday running from people who claim they're here to protect him." Mason flinched at his own name like it had been turned into a weapon. The man's jaw trembled. He finally spat. "It's not personal." Duke's eyes narrowed. "Then why'd you call him by name?" The man's lips parted. He knew he'd slipped outside the diner. He knew it. And Duke knew he knew. The man's shoulders sagged a fraction. "We were told the kid couldn't stay in town," he muttered. "We were told to take him somewhere quiet until—" "Until what?" Duke said. The man licked his lips, eyes darting to the fence like escape was still possible. Until Jenna stopped being a problem, he said. Mason's chest seized. Duke's hand closed around the man's collar in one sudden movement and slammed him back against a support post, not beating him, not raging, just pinning him so he couldn't lie with confidence. "Where is she?" Duke said, voice low. "Now." The man's eyes went wide. "I don't know exact. I swear, I'm not the one who holds her. We just move pieces." Duke's stare drilled into him. "Who's holding her?" The man's breath shook. "Mayor's people," he blurted. It's a county thing. Money, roots. She saw something. She recorded." Duke's jaw tightened. "Where were you supposed to bring the kid?" The man swallowed hard. "A trailer off Route 9. Old gravel pit, just for the night. Then they move him again." Mason's ears rang. His mom recorded something. His mom got taken because she recorded something. And now they were moving him like a box. Duke released the man and turned sharply. "Get eyes on Route 9, Duke ordered. "Now, 2 teams, quiet." Bikers moved instantly, helmets already coming up, engines already waking. Mason took a step toward Duke, voice breaking. Please just tell me she's alive." Duke turned back to him. For the first time, his face looked tired. "She's alive," Duke said. "If she wasn't, they wouldn't need you." Mason's knees nearly buckled. Then, from the table they'd dragged inside the yard, the burner phone vibrated. Once. Twice. Raven snapped her head toward it. Duke reached it in 2 strides and picked it up. The screen showed unknown caller. Duke's eyes cut to Mason. "Stay behind Raven," he said, and hit answer. He put the phone to his ear. For a heartbeat, there was only static. Then a woman's voice, thin, shaking but unmistakable, whispered one word that made Mason's whole body seize. "Mason! Mason!" Jenna's voice rasped through the burner like it had to crawl over broken glass to reach him. Mason lurched forward so hard, Raven had to catch his shirt and yank him back. His hands clawed at the air, desperate to grab the sound. "Mom!" he shouted. "Mom, I'm here!" Duke snapped the phone away from his ear and hit speaker with his thumb, dropping it onto the metal table in the yard so the whole circle could hear. He didn't do it for drama. He did it so nobody could later say they imagined it, so it would be real. So it would be recorded on 5 different devices at once. "Jenna," Duke said, voice low, steady. "Talk to me. Are you hurt?" A thin breath. Static. Then her whisper again, smaller, like she was speaking through a sleeve. Don't say names." Mason's throat tightened. He took a half step and Raven blocked him again, her arm across his chest. "Mason," she said, not cruel, just urgent. "Listen, don't shout." Mason bit down hard on his lip until he tasted metal. Duke leaned closer to the phone. "I'm not saying names. Where are you?" A pause, so long, Mason's heart tried to stop. Then Jenna's voice returned, trembling. I'm okay. I can't talk long." Mason made a broken sound. "Mom, please." "Baby," Jenna whispered, and that one word almost made him fold in half. "Baby, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Duke kept his tone even. "Jenna, give me one detail. Anything. A sign, a sound, a smell." "Anything I can use." Jenna inhaled like it hurt. "Water." Duke's eyes sharpened. "River? Lake?" Not river." Another breath. "Gravel. Trucks." Duke glanced at one of his riders. The rider already had a map app open, thumb moving. Mason tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't work. He could only stare at the phone like it was his mother's face. Jenna's whisper got thinner, urgent now. They want him. They keep saying, the kid." Mason's knees went weak. Duke's voice stayed calm, but something in it turned sharp as a snapped wire. "Who is they?" Jenna exhaled, shaking. "The sheriff knows." Mason's eyes shot to Duke. Duke didn't react. He already knew. He just needed her to say it. Jenna's voice cracked. "Duke, if you come loud, they'll—" A sound in the background. A door? A footstep? Jenna's breath hitched. Duke leaned closer. "Jenna, look for a mark, a name, anything on a wall." Jenna whispered, "A green trailer, rust, window taped." Mason's whole body trembled. "Mom, Listen to me," Jenna cut in, and her voice suddenly sounded like the Jenna Mason knew, the Jenna who got iron in her spine when life tried to crush her. "Mason, do you remember what I told you when the lights go out?" Mason blinked fast, trying to pull the memory through panic. Jenna's whisper pressed on. What did I say, baby? Mason's voice finally came out, small and shaking. Lock the door. Stay quiet. Good, Jenna breathed. Now do it. Stay with them. Don't be brave, just be smart. Mason sobbed once, sudden and ugly, like the sound had been hiding inside him all day. Duke's hand hovered over the phone, not touching it, like he was afraid the connection would break if he breathed wrong. Jenna, he said, I'm coming. No, she whispered fast. Not you, not first. Duke's eyes narrowed. Explain. Jenna's voice dropped even lower. They want you to hit them. They want you to look like monsters. They have cameras. A rustle, a muffled shout in the distance. Jenna's whisper turned frantic. Duke, promise me. What? Promise me you won't let him see it. Duke's gaze flicked to Mason, then to Raven, then back to the phone. I promise. Jenna let out a breath that sounded like it might have been relief. Then the line went dead. The burner stayed lit for a second. Then it went black. Mason stood there staring at the dead screen, waiting for her to come back like a prayer that refused to end. His chest rose and fell too fast. His fingers opened and closed like he was trying to grab her voice again. Mom, he whispered to nothing. Duke picked the phone up, stared at it, then handed it to a writer. Copy it, Duke said. Everything. Now. The writer nodded and moved. Mason's eyes snapped to Duke, wild. She said green trailer. She said, I heard, Duke said. She said the sheriff knows. I heard that too. Mason's voice broke. Then why aren't we going right now? Because you're a kid, and because they want me to go loud, and because your mom is smart enough to warn me. Duke didn't say any of that out loud. He crouched in front of Mason again, steadying his eyes on Mason's face. Because we do this the right way, Duke said. Fast and right. Mason shook his head, tears streaking down his cheeks. Right way is getting her. Duke nodded once. Yes? Then Duke stood and turned to his people like a switch flipped. 2 scouts, he said. Route 9. Gravel pits, truck yards, anything with trailers. Quiet, no lights, no hero stuff. Bikes rolled immediately, riders mounting like they'd been waiting for the order. Duke pointed to the lean biker with the chest camera. You're on the evidence. Pull the file off that drive and mirror it. 3 copies. Send 1 out of state. The biker nodded and jogged toward the building. Duke's gaze swept the yard. Nobody touches Mason without Raven. Nobody talks about Ray around him. Not now. Mason flinched at the name. Door. Inside, it smelled like oil and door. Inside, it smelled like oil and coffee and something faintly sweet from the cake box Duke still carried. The walls were covered in photos, bikes lined up in old black and white shots, group pictures, patches framed like trophies, names scratched into wood. This place was a world Mason had never imagined. It wasn't a bar. It wasn't a gang hideout from TV. It was organized, lived in, quietly tense. Duke led Mason down a hall to a small room with no windows, a couch, a table, a couple chairs, a stack of board games like someone had once tried to make it feel normal. This is where you stay, Duke said. Mason's hands shook. I'm not a baby. Duke's voice softened. I know. Mason swallowed hard. Then let me help. Duke stared at him for a beat. Then he nodded toward Mason's chest. That locket, Duke said. Don't take it off. Not for anybody. Mason's fingers went there automatically. Why? Duke's jaw tightened. Because your mom gave it to you for a reason, and because there are people who will try to use it. Mason's voice came out raw. Use it how? Duke didn't answer that. He set the cake box on the table, unopened. You hungry? Duke asked. Mason stared at the cake like it belonged to somebody else. No. Duke nodded like he expected that. Raven stays with you. Mason grabbed Duke's sleeve as Duke turned to leave, panic flaring again. Duke, if she calls again, she'll call, Duke said, and it wasn't a promise made out of hope. It sounded like a promise made out of certainty. And when she does, we'll be ready. Duke left. Raven stayed. Mason sank onto the couch, staring at his shoes, trying to stop his body from shaking. Raven sat in a chair near the door, arms crossed, eyes on the hallway like a guard dog. Minutes passed like hours. From the other side of the wall, Mason heard voices, low, clipped, fast. Mayor's on the drive. Cash, Roots. Klein tried to grab the kid. We need someone outside the town. Mason's head snapped up. Outside? Raven glanced at him. Adults talking, she said. My mom said cameras, Mason pushed. She said they want Duke to look like a monster. That means they're gonna lie. Raven's mouth tightened. Yes. Mason's voice shook. Then we tell the truth. Raven held his gaze for a moment. Then she stood and cracked the door open just enough to call down the hall. Duke, she said. Footsteps. Duke appeared in the doorway a second later, already moving, already thinking. Raven spoke quietly. Kid's right. If we don't get this out, they'll paint us. Duke nodded. Already doing it. He turned his head and spoke down the hall. Twitch. Phone. A younger biker with a laptop under one arm and a rat's nest of cables in his other hand jogged up, eyes bright with adrenaline. Call Holt, Duke said. State trooper, not local, the one that doesn't take money. Twitch's fingers were already moving. Yes, Prez. Duke's gaze slid to Mason. You stay here. Mason's voice came out hard. I'm not scared. Duke's eyes didn't soften. I am. That stopped Mason cold. Duke left again. Raven closed the door. Mason stared at her. You're scared? Raven didn't lie. Of what they'll do to get out of trouble. Yes. Mason's throat tightened. My mom saw something. Raven's eyes flicked to his locket again. Your mom saw a lot. The meeting point was a gas station off the highway, 20 minutes out. Duke didn't take the full convoy. He took 4 bikes and 1 car, quiet, no patches showing, no lights. Mason didn't go, but he watched from the clubhouse office window as Duke rode out, and he hated the helpless feeling that settled in his stomach like wet cement. Raven kept Mason inside, made him drink water, made him sit. Mason couldn't stop staring at the cake box. He finally pulled it toward him and lifted the lid. Chocolate, thick frosting. His name. He took a bite with his fingers because he couldn't find a fork. The sweetness hit his tongue and made his eyes sting again, because it tasted like something meant for a normal kid with a normal life. Raven watched him eat without speaking. An hour crawled by. Then the front doors slammed open hard enough to rattle the walls. Boots hit the floor. Voices spiked. Raven was on her feet instantly, moving Mason behind her. Duke strode in, helmet under his arm, face dark. His vest had dust across it now. One knuckle was split open. Where's Holt? Someone asked. Duke didn't stop walking. Holt didn't make it. The words sliced through the clubhouse like a blade. Mason's stomach dropped. What? Raven's hand tightened on his shoulder again, holding him back. Duke shoved into the office, Twitch right behind him, laptop open, fingers shaking. They hit him on the way, Duke said. Or they hit him when he got there. Cruiser was empty, door open, blood on the seat, no trooper. Twitch's voice came out fast. That means they control the highway too. Duke's eyes burned. It means this is bigger than a small-town sheriff. A biker near the doorway muttered, Feds? Duke shook his head once. Not yet. Not unless we can hand them something they can't ignore. He turned to Twitch. Reporter? Twitch nodded, already dialing. Lena Brooks still answering? She will when she sees the clip, Duke said. Mason's mind spun. A trooper gone. Blood. Highway controlled. His mom in a trailer. His birthday cake sitting half-eaten on a table in a biker clubhouse. Raven crouched beside him, voice low. Hey, stay with me. Mason swallowed, eyes burning. They took the trooper. Raven nodded once. Yes. Mason's voice cracked. So they can take my mom forever. Raven's jaw tightened. Not if we move smarter than they do. Across the room, Duke's phone buzzed. A scout call. Duke answered on speaker, eyes locked on nothing. Report, he said. A man's voice came through, whined in the background. Route 9, gravel pit yard. There's a green trailer like she said, rust, window taped. Duke's body went still. Mason stopped breathing. The scout continued, quieter now. But Duke, it's wrong. Duke's voice dropped. Define wrong. There are cameras, the scout said. Not like security, like they set them, facing the door, facing the road, new, and there's a sign on the trailer door. Duke's eyes narrowed. What sign? The scout hesitated. It says, Kid inside. Silence slammed down. Mason's hands curled into fists so tight his nails bit skin. Raven's face went cold. Duke's voice turned flat. Don't touch the door. The scout swallowed audibly. Already stopped. But there's something else. There's a wire, low, across the steps, like a trip. A faint click sounded through the phone, metallic and wrong. Duke's head snapped up. "Back out," Duke said, sharp. "Back out now." The line went dead. Duke didn't move for a full second after the line went dead. Not because he was stunned, because he was listening for the smallest thing. Breathing, wind, any sign the call hadn't ended the way it ended. Nothing. He turned his head and barked. "Keys, cutters, medkit, now." The clubhouse snapped into motion. Boots hit concrete. Helmets came off hooks. A door slammed somewhere. Twitch's laptop stayed open on the desk, the mirrored file progress bar still crawling, but Duke didn't even glance at it. Mason stood frozen in the doorway of the safe room, Raven half in front of him, half ready to sprint. He'd heard the words. He'd heard the click. He'd heard, "Back out now." "What happened?" Mason said, voice thin. Duke stopped long enough to look at him. "Scout tripped something." Mason's throat closed. Like a bomb?" Duke didn't sugarcoat it. "Could be." Mason took a step forward before Raven could stop him. "Then go! Go now!" Duke's eyes held his for half a heartbeat. Not cold, not kind, just heavy. "That's what I'm doing," Duke said. Raven's arm blocked Mason again. "You stay," she told him. "I can help." "No," Raven said, firm. "You can survive." Duke pointed at one of his men. "Hawk, sit on that kid like your life depends on it." A huge biker with a shaved head nodded once and took position by the safe room door without speaking. He didn't touch Mason. He didn't need to. His presence was the lock. Duke swung out the clubhouse door with 6 riders behind him, not a convoy, a blade. Engines lit up in a tight, controlled roar and vanished into the night. The gravel pit sat off Route 9 where the county stopped pretending it cared. A wide black mouth in the earth, mounds of stone like dead hills, rusting equipment silhouettes under floodlights that flickered as if the power itself was nervous. Duke cut his headlight 2 turns before the entrance. The bikes rolled dark, engines low, tires crunching lightly over loose gravel. They didn't take the main drive. They slipped through a service cut where the fence had been repaired too neatly. New wire on old posts. Someone had fixed it recently. "Cameras," Duke murmured into his headset. Raven wasn't with him, but Duke had one in his ear. Twitch monitoring from the clubhouse, feeding updates, tracking anything that hit the network. "Confirmed," Twitch's voice crackled. "I'm seeing 3 feeds pop online around that yard. Not local security, different uplink." Duke's jaw tightened. "Where's our scout?" A pause, static. Then, "No ping, phone dead." Duke lifted a hand. The riders behind him slowed, fanning out, boots down, making no unnecessary noise. They approached the yard's edge in a shallow arc, using shadow and stacked gravel piles as cover. And there it was, the green trailer. Rust down the sides like dried tears, a window taped from the inside with brown packing tape. The metal steps leading up to the door were crooked, and across them, barely visible in the low light, a thin wire stretched like a spider thread. On the door, taped crookedly, was the sign the scout had described. "Kid inside." Duke's stomach turned, not because he believed it, because he knew exactly what it was. A trigger for decent people, a trap for angry ones. "Hold," Duke whispered. His men froze. Somewhere beyond the trailer, a floodlight clicked, hummed, then steadied. The yard brightened by a fraction, like the place had just opened its eye. Duke's gaze swept the ground. Footprints, fresh, multiple. Not heavy work boots, not local deputy boots either. Cleaner tread. Then he saw it. Their scout, Spence, half crouched behind a stack of pallets 10 yards off the trailer, one knee in gravel, one hand pressed to his headset as if he'd tried to call again and again. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing heavy. He was locked in place like a statue, because a second wire ran low across the ground, right in front of him, angled to the pallets. Spence had stopped with his shin hovering an inch from it. Duke moved in slow, careful steps until he was beside him. Spence's eyes were wide. Sweat shone on his forehead, even in the dim. "Prez," Spence whispered, voice wrecked. I heard the click. Duke's gaze tracked the wire. It ran into the pallets, through the slats, toward something hidden behind. "Don't move," Duke whispered. I'm not, Spence breathed. Duke leaned and looked through the pallets. A propane tank sat behind them, then another, all connected with cheap zip ties and duct tape like someone had built it fast, not pretty. A crude detonator box sat near the ground, black, new, with a tiny red LED that blinked once every 2 seconds like a heartbeat. Duke felt rage climb up his spine, and he forced it down. This wasn't about rage. This was about not giving them what they wanted. He tapped his headset. Twitch. You getting this? Yeah, Twitch said, voice suddenly tight. Oh my God. Prez, it's a staged burn. They want footage of you blowing up a trailer. They'll call it terrorism. Duke's eyes stayed on the blinking red LED. Any remote signal? Hold. Twitch's keys clacked in the background. There's a hotspot nearby. Strong. Someone's streaming. Duke scanned the darkness and found a small camera mounted on a pole by the trailer, lens pointed directly at the steps and door. Another camera angled at the yard entrance, another at the gravel mound they'd used for cover. A whole set, built for a story, built to make Duke the villain. He breathed once, slow. Wire isn't for the trailer, Duke murmured. It's for the steps, for whoever rushes in. Spence swallowed. So, kid ain't inside. Kid's bait, Duke said. Spence's eyes flicked to the sign and back. What about Jenna? Duke didn't answer. He didn't have proof she'd ever been here, and Jenna's voice had sounded like she was near gravel and trucks. Yes, but that didn't mean this exact spot. This could be one of many cages. Duke pressed his headset again. Send a team wide right, find the uplink source. Quiet. No contact. 2 riders peeled off like ghosts. Duke looked at Spence. You're going to stay frozen. You move when I tell you. Spence nodded, breath shaking. Duke crouched slowly, pulled out a small flashlight with a red filter, and traced the wire from Spence's shin back to the detonator box. He didn't touch anything yet. He studied. Cheap setup, but not stupid. It wasn't a single pull. There was slack, there were knots. There was a second wire feeding into the box like a backup trigger, a fail-safe. Duke's jaw clenched. They built this to catch somebody who thinks cutting one wire ends it, Spence whispered. What do we do? Duke's eyes narrowed. We don't play their game. He signaled one of his men, a skinny rider nicknamed Finch, who used to fix electronics for a living before he started running with them. Finch slid in low beside Duke, never taking his eyes off the box. Can you kill it? Duke asked. Finch swallowed. Maybe. Maybe isn't good enough. Finch's hands were steady as he opened a small tool pouch. If it's remote, I can jam. If it's pressure and trip, I can disarm. But if there's a secondary, Duke cut him off. Assume there's 3. Finch nodded once. Then we move him without touching the wire. Spence's eyes widened. How? Finch pointed to Spence's belt line. You got a knife? Spence's hand trembled as he slowly reached for his pocket, careful not to shift his shin. Duke took it from him and pressed it into Finch's hand. Finch slid the blade under Spence's belt loop, where his jeans met his skin. This is gonna sting, Finch whispered. Don't flinch. Spence's face tightened. Do it. Finch cut fabric, not wire, a thin slice along the seam, freeing Spence's jeans so his leg could move without dragging the wire. Duke held Spence's shoulder. Breathe. Tiny movements. Spence nodded, jaw clenched, and raised his leg millimeter by millimeter. Gravel crunched softly. The wire stayed still. Then, as Spence's shin cleared it, Finch's hand froze. The red LED blinked faster, once, twice, 3 times. Finch went pale. It's sensing movement anyway. Duke's blood went cold. How? Finch whispered. Pressure plate under gravel. It's not just wire. Duke felt the yard tighten around them, like the night had been waiting for this exact moment. In his headset, Twitch's voice spiked. Prez, uplink moved. Someone's watching live. They just switched angles. Duke's gaze snapped to one of the cameras. The lens shifted slightly, tracking. Pull back, Duke whispered. Now. Spence moved too fast, not because he chose to, because fear forced him. His boot shifted weight. A faint click sounded again, not the wire, under the gravel. Finch's hand shot out, grabbing Spence's belt and yanking him backward like ripping a man off a cliff edge. Spence stumbled, fell hard onto his back. The red LED on the detonator box flashed solid. Duke didn't think. He grabbed Spence under the arms and dragged him behind the gravel pile as his men sprinted low, diving for cover. "Down!" Duke roared. The explosion didn't sound like movies. It sounded like the air tearing open. A shockwave slammed the gravel pile, pelting them with stone. Heat rolled over Duke's back like a furnace door opening. The green trailer lit up in a bloom of orange, metal screaming as it warped. Cameras on poles toppled like snapped fingers, still streaming as they fell. The taped windows shattered outward in glittering rain. Mason wasn't there to see it, but Duke still heard Jenna's whisper in his head. "Don't let him see it." Duke pushed Spence's head down with his palm and held him there through the second bang, smaller, sharper, when a propane tank ruptured and threw a lid of fire into the sky. Then the yard filled with smoke. Duke lifted his head and scanned. The trailer door had blown inward and hung twisted, half open. Inside, there was no kid, no hostage, just a cheap folding chair, a roll of duct tape, and a camera on a tripod facing the doorway. A movie set. A trap built to manufacture a headline. Duke's teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. Finch coughed, eyes watering. "Spence alive?" Spence groaned, shaking, blood streaking his cheek from where gravel had cut him, but he was breathing. Duke grabbed his headset. "Twitch, clip that. You got it?" Twitch's voice was breathless. "Yeah, I'm pulling feeds from our chest cams. We've got proof it was staged. We've got the sign. We've got the wire. We've got the—" A distant wail cut through the smoke. Siren. Then another. Then the low thump of heavy tires hitting gravel. More than one vehicle. More than local cruisers. Faster. Organized. Duke looked toward the yard entrance. Headlights spilled through the smoke like knives. Then a voice boomed through a loudspeaker, distorted but unmistakable. "Duke Mercer, this is Sheriff Grady. Drop your weapons and step out with your hands up." Duke's eyes narrowed. They hadn't just been watching. They'd been waiting for the explosion, waiting for their proof, waiting to roll in and call him exactly what they wanted him to be. Duke rose slowly from behind the gravel pile, smoke swirling around his shoulders, and watched the line of vehicles pour into the yard like a net closing. Duke stepped out of the smoke with both hands open and empty, palms forward, moving slow enough that even a nervous rookie couldn't claim he reached. Behind him, his riders rose from cover one by one, coughing, faces streaked with soot and gravel dust. Nobody lifted a weapon. Nobody ran. They did exactly what Jenna had begged for. Don't give them the picture they want. Headlights poured through the haze. Cruisers, black SUVs, a county truck with a light bar, and a boxy van that looked like it belonged to a tactical unit. Tires crunched gravel in a widening arc until the whole yard was ringed. Sheriff Grady's voice blasted again from the loudspeaker. "On the ground! Now! Hands on your head!" Duke didn't drop. He raised his voice just enough to carry, "Sheriff, you're early." Grady's door slammed. He climbed out with his vest on, hand hovering near his pistol, jaw clenched like he'd been dreaming of this moment. Deputies fanned out with rifles up, feet planted wide, trying to look brave while the smoke stung their eyes. "How'd you get here so fast?" Duke called. "You sitting on standby for a trailer to blow?" "Shut up!" Grady shouted, but his voice cracked on the last word. A deputy on the right lifted a phone on a gimbal. Someone was already filming from their side too, making sure the first version of the story was theirs. Duke saw it and smiled once without humor. "Perfect," he muttered. He turned his head slightly. "Finch, Spence, stay down." Spence tried to push up anyway, shaking, but Finch forced him back, one hand on his shoulder. Grady couldn't pretend he didn't hear him. Duke kept his hands visible and walked forward until he was close enough that Grady couldn't pretend he didn't hear him. "You're going to arrest me," Duke said calmly. "Fine. But before you do, walk your people into that trailer and tell me what you see." Grady's eyes narrowed through the smoke. "You blew it up." Duke didn't blink. "I didn't even touch the door." Grady barked to his deputies. "Secure the scene. Treat them as armed and dangerous." Duke's voice cut through. "Where's your body cams, Sheriff?" Grady hesitated. It was tiny, the pause, but it landed. A few deputies glanced at each other. A couple had cams, a couple didn't. Klein wasn't there, at least not visible, like a rat that waited for the room to clear. Duke turned his chin toward one of his men with a chest camera, the lean rider everyone called Lenz. Lenz was 30 yards back, partially hidden by a gravel mound, camera still blinking red. Duke raised his voice. "Lenz, you streaming?" Lenz shouted back. "Recording. Uplink's dirty, but it's recording." "Good," Duke said. Then, to Grady, "I've got your trap on video, your sign, your wire, your cameras, your streaming rig." Grady's face tightened. "You're lying." Duke nodded once, as if accepting Grady's need to lie. Then he pointed with 2 fingers, slow, no sudden movements, toward the blown trailer door. "Go look," Duke said. "There's a folding chair and a tripod inside. No kid. Never was." Grady didn't move. He didn't want to look, because looking meant risking truth. Instead, he raised his voice, louder, angrier, performing for the lenses. "You set this up to lure law enforcement. You're done, Duke. Everybody saw the explosion." Duke's eyes went flat. Everybody saw a staged scene blow up. Grady's nostrils flared. He stepped closer, staying behind his deputy's line like a man who liked authority more than danger. "Drop to your knees," Grady ordered. "Hands behind your head." Duke held his gaze. "Not until my injured man gets medical, and not until you acknowledge there was no kid in that trailer." Grady's mouth twisted. "No." Duke's voice lowered. "Then you're the one risking a kid's life for a headline." Something shifted in the deputies. Not rebellion, uncertainty. A couple of them looked past Duke toward the trailer, toward the way the sign "Kid Inside" still lay half-burned in the dirt, readable if you wanted it to be. Grady saw the doubt spreading and snapped. "Baker, go check the trailer." A deputy broke from the line, rifle up, moving cautious toward the blown door. He stepped through smoke, then hesitated at the threshold, staring into the wreck. Duke watched him carefully, reading his face. The deputy swallowed. He turned slightly and called back, voice hoarse. "Sheriff, there's no kid." Grady's face didn't change at first. Then it did, tightening, as if that sentence physically hurt. Duke raised his voice again. "Say it, Sheriff. Say it on camera." Grady didn't answer. He lifted his chin like he was above this, but the sound of his silence was louder than the explosion. The deputy at the trailer door stepped further inside and kicked something. A tripod leg clanged against metal. The deputy looked back again, eyes wide now, and said the word that made the whole yard tilt. "Camera." Duke's jaw clenched. "Tripwire too," he called, "and remote feeds." Grady's gaze snapped to one of the SUVs. A man in plain tactical clothes, no badge, shifted behind the hood as if he wanted to disappear. Duke noticed, and his voice sharpened like a hook. "Who's that, Sheriff? County? State? Or one of your mayor's friends?" Grady's hand flexed near his weapon. "You're done talking." A deputy moved in behind Duke with cuffs. Duke didn't resist. He kept his hands visible, calm, letting them close in. Then the deputy hesitated, because Duke's wrists were still free, and if Duke chose violence right now, the yard would light up. Duke didn't choose it. He spoke quietly to the deputy closest to him. "Make sure your cam is on." The deputy blinked. "What?" Duke's eyes flicked to the deputy's chest. "Make sure it's on, because your sheriff is about to lie, and he'll blame you too when this breaks." The deputy's throat bobbed. His hand shifted to his camera and tapped it on without thinking. Grady saw that and stepped forward fast. "Cuff him!" The cuffs clicked shut around Duke's wrists. Duke let it happen. No fight, no pull, no show. Grady leaned in close, voice low so only Duke could hear. "You think you can paint me dirty? You think anybody cares what's on your little videos?" Duke's stare didn't move. "Your deputy tried to grab a child. Your trap sign said 'Kid Inside.' Your trailer had a camera waiting. You care. That's why you're sweating." Grady's lips peeled back. "You don't know what you're in." Duke's voice stayed even. "I know my son's mother is alive." Grady froze for half a breath at the word son. Then he recovered, eyes hard. "Move." Deputies marched Duke toward the van. Behind him, Finch shouted, "Spence needs help." Grady barked, "He can bleed in holding." Duke stopped walking. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a full stop, and somehow it halted the whole line. He turned his head slightly without twisting his cuffed wrists. "Medical," Duke said, voice carrying. "Now." Grady stepped closer, furious. "Keep moving." Duke didn't. "You refuse medical, and you prove what you are." A deputy near the back shifted uncomfortably. Another deputy glanced at Spence, still on the ground, coughing, blood on his face. Grady saw the softness and snapped at them. Do your jobs! Duke lifted his voice one more time, louder than the sirens, louder than the engine ticks. This is a setup, a staged burn. There was never a kid. You're watching a sheriff try to manufacture a crime. Phones lifted from behind the police line. Somebody had climbed a mound to record over the deputy's shoulders. Even with the ring of vehicles, the public was still there at the far fence, drawn by light and noise. Grady's eyes darted to them. He didn't like an audience when he couldn't control the script. "Fine," Grady spat. "Get the medic." A deputy ran to the cruiser and yanked out a kit. He knelt by Spence, hands moving quick, pressing gauze, checking eyes. Duke watched until he saw Spence's chest rising steady. Then, Duke nodded once. "Now we move." Grady seized the moment and shoved Duke forward again, steering him like a trophy toward the van. As Duke passed one of the unmarked SUVs, the plainclothes man behind it leaned out just enough to whisper, "Should have let the kid go." Duke didn't look at him. "Should have let the mom go." The man's mouth twitched, amused. "Not your call." Duke stepped into the van. The inside smelled like rubber and old sweat, metal benches, a cage partition, no markings, no department seal, no unit number. Two deputies climbed in with him. One looked young, eyes too wide, hand shaking slightly as he clipped Duke's cuffs to a chain. Duke met his gaze. "You know this isn't right," Duke said quietly. The deputy swallowed. "I'm just doing—" Duke cut him off, gentle but firm. "You're just doing what gets you blamed later." The deputy's face tightened. Outside, Grady spoke into his radio, voice loud enough to be heard through the open van door. "Transporting Mercer to County." Duke's eyes narrowed. County was south, but the van's front wheels turned east. Duke felt it in the shift, in the angle of the headlights, in the way the driver didn't look at Grady for confirmation. The van door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed Duke except for the faint red glow of a dash light bleeding through the cage. The engine rumbled. The van started moving. And Duke realized, with a cold clarity that made his ribs feel too tight, that this wasn't a ride to booking. This was a handoff. He leaned forward against the chain, listening, because outside the metal walls, someone was already on the phone making sure Jenna never got found with him alive. The van didn't head south. Duke felt it in his bones before he saw it, before the engine note changed, before the turns got too clean, before the driver stopped pretending they were going to any county building at all. They rolled out of the gravel pit yard and cut east, away from everything with a flagpole and a front desk. No lights, no siren, no radio chatter meant for public ears. Just speed. The young deputy across from Duke kept his eyes forward, jaw locked. The older one sat with his knee bouncing, hand resting too close to his sidearm like he was waiting for an excuse to use it. Duke leaned against the chain that tethered his cuffs to the bench, letting it bite his wrists while he listened. Up front, the driver spoke into a phone, not a radio. "Yeah," the driver said. "Got him. East Ridge drop, same as last time." The older deputy muttered, "Shut up, not in here." The driver didn't lower his voice. "He can hear all day. He ain't going to be breathing by dawn." The young deputy flinched at that. His eyes flicked to Duke for a split second, then away like shame was contagious. Duke kept his face neutral. He didn't give them a reaction. Reactions made men like this bold. "Who's waiting?" the older deputy asked. "Two vehicles, black, and a white box truck," the driver said. "They want him transferred clean. No booking, no paper." The words "clean" and "no paper" landed like a knife sliding into place. Duke exhaled slowly through his nose and shifted his cuffs, just enough to check what he had. Metal, cheap chain, standard keyholes. He didn't have a key, but he did have time. And he had men who didn't quit. At the clubhouse, Mason heard the gate slam and knew before anyone said a word. Raven was already moving, cutting down the hall like she'd been shot out of a cannon. Hawk stepped aside to let her pass, eyes hard. Mason sprang off the couch. "What's happening?" Raven didn't answer at first. She burst into the main room, where Twitch was hunched over his laptop, hands flying, face pale. "Talk," Raven snapped. Twitch looked up, swallowed. "Duke's in a transport van, unmarked, not county." Mason's chest seized. "They took him." Raven's eyes cut to Mason. "Back in the room." "No," Mason said, voice shaking. "No, he came for my mom. Raven grabbed Mason's shoulders, not rough but firm enough to stop him from running. Listen to me, she said low. They didn't take him because they're strong. They took him because they're scared. Mason's eyes burned. Where are they going? Twitch answered, voice tight. East. They turned off Route 9. Lenz is tailing from distance. Raven turned toward the bikes. Who's with Lenz? Twitch didn't hesitate. Brick and Silo, 3 bikes, no lights. Raven's jaw clenched. Not enough. She snapped her head toward the room. Finch, get your kit. We're stopping a van. Mason stepped forward again. I'm coming. Raven's eyes flashed. No. Mason's throat tightened. I'm not a... You're a target, Raven cut in. You show your face anywhere near that road, and every corrupt badge in 2 counties will trade your life for a headline. Mason's voice broke. Then what am I supposed to do? Raven held his gaze for a beat, and Mason saw it. Real anger, not at him, at the world. Stay alive, she said. So your mom has something to come home to. Hawk opened the safe room door without being told. It wasn't a suggestion. Mason backed toward it like he was being shoved by invisible hands. Tell Duke Raven didn't soften. He knows. The door shut. Mason stood behind it, breathing hard, listening to engines wake outside like thunder forming. Out on the dark county road, Lenz kept the van in sight without getting close enough to be seen. He rode with his headlight off, running on moonlight and memory, the outline of the van a black block against the faint gray of the road. Brick rode behind him, Silo far left on a parallel service lane, keeping eyes on turns. Lenz spoke into his mic, quiet. They're heading toward East Ridge. Twitch's voice crackled back in his ear, layered with keyboard clicks. I'm watching your cam feed. Keep distance. Don't get made. Lenz breathed. Copy. The van's brake lights flared ahead. Lenz tensed, ready for an abrupt turn or a trap. But the van didn't stop. It slowed at an intersection, then rolled through like it owned the night. A mile later, the road narrowed. Trees closed in, no houses, no street lamps, just darkness and the smell of damp earth. Brick's voice murmured over comms. Perfect place to disappear. Lenz didn't answer. He already knew. Then Twitch's voice snapped in again, faster. Raven's moving. She's got 6 bikes and a truck. They're cutting in from the south. Lenz felt relief and dread hit at the same time. Tell her the van's got at least 2 deputies inside. Copy, Twitch said. And Lenz, Duke's still cuffed. Don't force a shootout. Lenz's jaw tightened. Wasn't planning to. Ahead, the van's headlights swept over a roadside sign as they passed. East Ridge Industrial Park, 2 miles. Lenz's stomach turned. Industrial meant cameras. Industrial meant warehouses. Industrial meant places where screams didn't travel. He whispered into his mic, They're close. Inside the van, Duke counted turns by the way his body shifted, by the weight of the chain tugging his wrists, by the brief lean of centrifugal force. 1 left, 1 right, another left, then straight for too long. He looked at the young deputy again, really looked. The kid's knuckles were white on his own knees. His breathing was shallow. Duke kept his voice low. What's your name? The deputy didn't answer. Duke didn't push. He changed angle. You got a mother? The deputy's eyes flicked up. Don't. You got a kid? Duke asked. A little brother? Somebody you'd bleed for? The older deputy scoffed. Shut him up, the young one swallowed. Stop talking. Duke held his gaze anyway. They're not taking me to booking, Duke said calmly. You know that. The young deputy's jaw trembled. The older deputy leaned toward him. He's playing you, Duke spoke softly. I'm not playing anyone. I'm telling you your sheriff just put you in a box with a dead man so you can be blamed when it goes wrong. The young deputy's eyes widened slightly. The driver's voice came from up front. You two hush back there. Duke leaned in a fraction closer. When this ends, they'll say you tried to stop it, Duke murmured. Or they'll say you helped. Either way, you're burned. Decide now which lie you want to live with. The young deputy's throat worked. Then, barely audible, he whispered, They said you'd fight. Duke nodded once. I'm not fighting you. The kid's eyes flicked down to Duke's cuffs, to the chain, to the keyholes. He didn't move. But Duke saw the thought forming. Good. Let it form. Raven's group hit the back roads hard. 6 bikes, 1 pickup truck with a flatbed, no patches visible, no loud revving, just speed and intent. Raven rode lead, eyes scanning every intersection like she was reading a map printed on the night. Finch rode beside her, tool pouch strapped tight, jaw clenched. Two others flanked. The truck ran rear, ready to block. Twitch fed them directions through comms, voice clipped. Van's 2 miles from East Ridge Industrial Park. Lens has eyes. Raven's response was a growl. Where's the narrow point? Twitch's keys clacked. There's a 1-lane bridge over a drainage channel, 50 feet, guardrails, no shoulder. Raven didn't hesitate. We stopped them there. Finch's voice cut in. No guns, Raven snapped. No guns! They accelerated. Len saw the bridge before the van did. A dark ribbon over black water, thin guardrails, the road pinching down like a throat. He whispered, "Bridge coming up." Brick replied, "Raven's truck can block the far end." Lens's heart hammered. If they did this wrong, a deputy would panic, somebody would fire, and the whole story would become exactly what Jenna warned about, bikers attacking law enforcement. Then, Raven's pickup appeared ahead, pulled halfway into the road on the far side of the bridge, hazard lights blinking like a broken-down vehicle. Perfect. The van's brake lights flared hard. It slowed, then rolled onto the bridge anyway, cautious. As it reached the center, 2 bikes slid out from the trees behind it, Brick and Silo, closing the rear without touching, just filling the lane. Lens moved up the left side, headlights still off, staying just far enough back that the driver couldn't claim he rammed anything. The van stopped dead in the middle of the bridge. For a heartbeat, there was silence, but for ticking metal and the faint rush of water below. Then, the van's side door slammed from inside. A deputy's voice shouted, "Move your truck!" Raven's voice carried back, calm and loud. "Vehicle won't start. Already called it in." That was a lie, but it was a clean one. A lie that sounded like normal life. The driver honked, long, angry blasts. Brick raised his voice from behind the van. "Open the door and show us your badge numbers." Inside the van, Duke felt the shift, the stop, the tension, the sudden change in air pressure like the night had tightened its fist. He leaned forward against the chain, listening. The older deputy snapped, "Stay still." Duke's eyes stayed on the young deputy. The young one's face had gone pale. He could hear the bikes. He could hear the controlled voices. He could hear that this wasn't chaos. Duke spoke low. "This is your chance." The older deputy reached for his weapon. The young deputy moved first. Fast, almost involuntary. His hand shot out and grabbed the older deputy's wrist, yanking it down. "What are you doing?" the older deputy hissed. The young deputy's voice cracked. "This isn't booking." The older deputy's eyes went wide with rage. "Let go!" The van rocked slightly as bodies shifted. Outside, Raven called, "We have cameras, we're recording. Step out slow." The driver shouted something Duke couldn't make out, and the older deputy jerked his arm free, twisting toward Duke. And the young deputy slammed his shoulder into the older one's chest, knocking him back against the bench. Duke didn't waste it. He surged forward with the chain still on, drove his cuffed hands hard into the older deputy's forearm, pinning it, forcing the weapon hand away from his belt. No punches, no headshots, just leverage and pain. The older deputy grunted, teeth bared, and Duke heard the smallest sound, metal scraping. The young deputy had found the keyring on the older man's belt. His hands shook as he jammed a key into Duke's cuff. Click. Duke's left cuff sprang open. He ripped his wrist free, grabbed the key ring, and in one practiced motion, like he'd done it years ago, popped the other cuff. The chain clattered to the floor. The older deputy lunged. Duke slammed him into the cage partition with his shoulder, hard enough to rattle the van, and held him there without striking, forearm locked under the man's collarbone. Outside, the van's rear doors jerked as someone tried to open them. Brick's voice barked, "Hands where we can see them." The older deputy spat, "They'll kill us." Duke leaned close to his ear. "They're saving you," Duke whispered. "If you don't make them your enemy." Duke released him and turned to the side door. The driver was shouting up front, trying to decide whether to ram the truck. Raven's pickup held steady, hazards blinking, blocking the bridge exit like a patient threat. Duke grabbed the side door handle and yanked it open. Cold night air flooded in. Bikes surrounded the van in a loose ring, not crashing into it, not swarming, just present, cameras on, headlights angled low. Raven stood in the road, helmet off, hair whipping in the wind, one hand raised open like a traffic cop. Her eyes met Duke's. "Get out," she said. Duke stepped down onto the bridge. He raised his hand so every camera could see. "Nobody shoot," Duke called. "We're clean." The young deputy followed him out, hands up too, shaking. The older deputy hesitated inside. Raven's voice stayed calm, deadly. "Step out. Slow." The older deputy crawled out, face twisted, eyes darting at the bikes like he was expecting a beating. He didn't get one. He got a phone in his face. Len stepped forward, camera blinking red. "Badge number," Len said. The older deputy clenched his jaw. Raven didn't move closer. She just waited, patient as winter. Finally, the older deputy muttered it, and Lenz repeated it loud, making sure the audio caught. Raven turned toward the driver. "You too." The driver didn't step out. Instead, the van's engine revved. Duke's head snapped. Raven's truck shifted, an inch forward, blocking harder. Brick moved his bike a foot to the side, cutting the driver's angle. The engine revved again, louder. Finch stepped up, voice sharp. "If you ram, you kill deputies, not us." The engine note dipped, then stopped. The driver's door opened and the driver stepped out slowly, hands raised, face blank. Duke stared at him, not a deputy, just a man with dead eyes and a phone where a radio should be. Raven's gaze hardened. "Who hired you?" The driver didn't answer. Duke stepped closer, voice low. "East Ridge drop, black vehicles, white box truck." He watched the man's eyes. "Who's waiting?" The driver swallowed. Then, far in the distance, a horn blared, different from a car horn, longer, heavier, a truck. Headlights appeared through the trees behind them, rounding the bend toward the bridge, not one, two, and between them, flashing red and blue. Raven's jaw clenched. "They found us." Duke's eyes narrowed at the approaching lights, because the lead vehicle wasn't a cruiser. It was a black SUV with no markings, moving too fast, and behind its windshield, Duke saw the faint outline of a camera rig on the dash, already recording. The first black SUV hit the bridge like it owned the road. No markings, no light bar, just dark paint, tinted glass, and a dash-mounted camera rig pointed straight at Duke the moment the headlights found him. Behind it, red and blue flashed, not from a single cruiser, but from a line. 2 county units and a bigger vehicle that looked like it belonged to a tactical team. And farther back, the long horn again. Heavy trucks pushing the whole procession forward. Raven didn't flinch. She lifted her phone higher, flashlight on, lens aimed at the SUV's windshield. "Everybody keep hands visible," she shouted, loud enough for every camera on both sides. "No sudden moves," Brick echoed it from behind the van. "Visible hands, we're recording." Duke took one step forward and raised his voice, controlled, clean. "This van was transporting me without booking, unmarked, East Ridge drop, no paperwork. 2 deputies inside confirmed it. Driver is not law enforcement." The black SUV rolled closer, slow, deliberate, until it stopped 10 yards away. The passenger door opened. A man stepped out wearing a tactical vest and a baseball cap, no badge on his chest, no name. He walked with the confidence of someone used to people stepping aside. He lifted his hands in a calming gesture. "Let's not escalate. Sheriff's on the way." Raven's eyes went flat. "You're not a sheriff." The man smiled like she'd made a cute joke. "Ma'am, step back." Duke didn't step back. He kept his hands open and spoke louder because he understood the real battlefield. "State your agency," Duke said. "Say it on camera." The man's smile stayed on, but his eyes hardened. He glanced at the camera rig in the SUV, then at Lenz's chest cam blinking red, then at the phones in biker hands. He chose his words carefully. "We're coordinating transport for public safety." Duke nodded once as if that answered everything it needed to answer. "So you're nobody?" The man's jaw flexed. "Sir, you're going to be detained." "Detained by who?" Duke asked. "You?" The man motioned behind him. The county cruiser doors opened and deputies started to spill out, rifles up, voices loud. The same performance Jenna warned about, volume instead of truth. A deputy with a megaphone shouted, "Everybody on the ground, now!" Raven didn't move. She raised her voice again, crisp and clear, like reading a statement. "We stopped an unmarked transport. We have a witness deputy. We have a driver admitting an East Ridge drop with no booking. We have video." The megaphone voice barked again. "On the ground!" Brick yelled back. "Cam is on! Badge numbers loud!" The black SUV man took 2 steps forward, trying to close distance on Duke. Duke held his ground, calm enough to make the move look aggressive on film. "You want this to look like a biker riot," Duke said, voice low but carrying. "That's why your dash cam is already rolling." The man's eyes flicked, just once, to the dash rig. That was all Duke needed. "You don't know what you're doing," the man said quietly, as if offering mercy. Duke's gaze didn't move. "I know exactly what you're doing. I've seen it before." The man opened his mouth to answer, and Raven cut him off, louder. "Driver," she snapped, turning her camera toward the van driver standing with hands up. "Tell the cameras where you were taking Duke." The driver's throat bobbed. He looked at the deputies. He looked at the SUV man. He looked at the bikes around him. Then he broke. "East Ridge," he blurted. "Industrial Park. Drop. 2 black vehicles and a white box truck. That's what I was told." A ripple moved through the deputies. A couple looked at each other like that wasn't the script they were handed. The SUV man's face tightened. "Shut up." Raven didn't blink. "Say your name," she ordered the driver. The driver hesitated. Duke stepped in, voice calm, cutting. "You don't have to be loyal to people who plan to bury you." The driver swallowed hard. "Caleb," he said. "Caleb Rudd." Raven repeated it for the camera. "Caleb Rudd, stating East Ridge drop with no booking." The SUV man's smile was gone now. He turned his head slightly toward the deputies and made a small motion with 2 fingers, subtle, like directing traffic. 2 deputies shifted their rifles a little higher. Duke felt it instantly. Not an arrest posture, a pressure posture. He lifted his voice again, sharp as a bell. "Nobody fires. You fire, and you prove this was never about law." The megaphone barked again, but the command sounded less confident now. Then the trucks arrived. 2 big rigs rolled up behind the cruisers, lights glaring, engines idling hard. Not county vehicles, private, the kind of trucks that could block an entire road without a wreck. Raven's eyes narrowed. "They brought blockers." Duke's gaze slid past the SUV man to the road behind the cruisers. A second black SUV pulled in, and when its rear hatch popped, Duke saw something that made his blood go cold. A white box truck behind it, door already open, empty inside like a mouth. Not for cargo, for bodies. The SUV man stepped closer and lowered his voice, dropping the performance. "We can end this clean," he said to Duke. "You walk back into the van, we drive. No one gets hurt." Duke stared at him. "My man is a witness now. Your driver's a witness now. You want them clean too?" The man's eyes didn't blink. "They don't matter." That was the moment Raven's expression changed. Not anger, calculation. She leaned toward Duke just enough to speak without the nearest deputy catching it. "We can't hold the bridge," she murmured. "We can only leave it." Duke didn't look away from the SUV man. "Agreed." He raised his voice, loud again for the cameras. "Deputy," he called, turning his head toward the young deputy who'd helped him inside the van. "Tell them, on camera." The young deputy's hands were shaking, but he stepped forward into Raven's phone light, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "They weren't taking him to booking," he said. "Driver said drop. No paperwork. Sheriff told us to ride along." A deputy barked. "Shut up!" The young deputy flinched, then kept going like he'd reached the point where fear stopped working. "There was no county destination. We turned east. They said he wouldn't be breathing by dawn." Silence hit like a slap. The SUV man's jaw clenched. He turned sharply toward the deputies. "Cuff him," he snapped. "All of them." Raven lifted her phone higher. "Who are you to order deputies?" The man ignored her. He stepped toward the young deputy, hand reaching like he wanted to pull him off camera. Duke moved, not fast, not violent, just into the path so the reach became obvious on film. "Touch that kid and you'll have to explain why," Duke said. The SUV man's eyes flashed. "You're done." Duke nodded once. "Not before you show your face to a federal judge." And then Duke did the one thing they didn't want. He laughed, short, bitter, then called out over the whole scene. "Twitch!" he shouted, speaking to his own comms. "Send the clip to Lena Brooks right now, and send it to every state outlet that hates this county. Everything, the trap trailer, the bridge, all of it." Twitch's voice crackled faintly in Duke's ear, barely audible under engines. "Already pushing, reporters responding." The SUV man's head snapped toward Duke like a snake hearing a footstep. "You shouldn't have said that," he said. Raven's voice went ice cold. "That's a threat. We got it on video." The SUV man didn't care anymore. He lifted his hand and made a new signal. The big rig's engines revved. The cruisers shifted positions. They were about to crush the bridge from both ends and call it necessary force. Duke looked at Raven. One nod. Raven turned, shouting to her people, "Break! Now!" The bikes moved instantly, not chaotic, not wild. Two bikes surged forward and slid toward the guardrail gap Raven had already spotted, a maintenance cut just before the bridge, barely wide enough for a motorcycle. The pickup truck dropped into reverse, dragging itself off centerline just enough to create a lane. Brick and Silo rolled their bikes away from the van's rear like opening a gate. Duke grabbed the young deputy by the shoulder and pulled him toward Raven. "You're coming," Duke said. "You're not dying in their cleanup." The young deputy stumbled. I can't." "Yes, you can," Duke said, and pushed him into Raven's reach. Raven grabbed the deputy's sleeve and hauled him toward the maintenance cut. "Move." Len stayed filming as he backed up, camera fixed on the SUV man's face. The man saw it and lunged forward. And at that exact moment, a cruiser surged, trying to cut off the escape lane. Finch slammed his bike sideways into the cruiser's path, not hitting it, just forcing it to brake without contact. The cruiser skidded, tires squealing. A deputy inside threw his hands up, startled. The sound was loud enough to sell the chaos. But the cameras caught the truth. The cruiser moved first. Duke sprinted, not toward violence, toward exit. He grabbed Caleb Rudd by the elbow as he passed. "You want to live?" Duke snapped. "Then run." Caleb's face went white. He ran. The SUV man shouted something, and the first rifle came up. Raven screamed, "No guns!" A shot cracked anyway. Not from the bikers, from behind the cruisers. The round punched into the guardrail, showering sparks. Duke felt the world narrow. He shoved the young deputy down the maintenance cut, then dove after him, shoulder-scraping metal as they squeezed through into the darkness under the bridge approach. Bikes poured through one by one, engines snarling low. The pickup truck couldn't fit. It peeled the other way, drawing the big rig's attention as planned, hazards flashing as it sped off down the main road like a fleeing target. Behind Duke, more shots cracked, high, panicked, sloppy. Then the sound changed as the convoy hit dirt. They were off the bridge now, racing along the drainage channel in a narrow service path where trucks couldn't follow, only headlights and anger behind them. Raven's voice came through Duke's headset, breathless. "Head count!" Duke's answer was immediate. "I'm up. Young deputy is up. Caleb is—" A shout cut through comms. "Caleb's down!" Duke's head snapped back. Behind them, in the bouncing headlight spill, Caleb Rudd had tripped on loose gravel and gone to his knees. A bike swerved to avoid him. Another brake light flared. For a split second, Caleb was a sitting target. Duke turned back without thinking. Raven screamed, "Duke, no!" Duke ran toward Caleb, grabbed him by the collar, and yanked him up, and headlights flooded the service path from above. An SUV had found an access point. The beam pinned them like insects. A voice shouted from the ridge, amplified by a loudspeaker again, smug now. "Stop, or we drop you right there!" Duke shoved Caleb forward into the darkness and threw his own body between the light and the man's back. "Run!" Duke roared. They sprinted into the trees, engines scattering like a storm, breaking into pieces. An hour later, they regrouped in an abandoned way station off an old logging road, far enough from cell towers that the air felt quieter. Raven's hands were shaking as she checked the young deputy for injuries. Finch wrapped a cut on Brick's arm. Lenz kept filming anyway, like if he stopped, the truth would stop too. Twitch called again. "Lena Brooks is on board," he said, voice tight. "She's looping in a federal contact. She says they've been watching the mayor for months. Jenna is the missing witness they can't locate." Duke's jaw clenched. "Then we locate her." Twitch hesitated. "Prez, Lena says don't move loud. She says if you go in with bikes, they'll relocate Jenna again." Duke stared into the dark. "They'll relocate her anyway." Twitch's keys clacked. "Wait, Caleb's phone. I cracked the lock. There's a message thread, new one, just came in." Duke's eyes sharpened. "Read it." Twitch's voice dropped. "It says, move Jenna to Riverboat Yard, Dock 3. Now, Mayor wants to see the kid's face when it ends." Duke's breath went cold. Raven looked up. "Riverboat Yard?" Duke nodded once. "Industrial, water, trucks, gravel." Jenna's words, the pieces clicked in his mind like a loaded magazine. Duke turned to Lenz. "You stay on the camera. If this goes bad, the truth still goes out." Lenz nodded, throat tight. Duke turned to Raven. "You take the young deputy and Caleb to Lena. They're witnesses. Keep them breathing." Raven's eyes hardened. "And you?" Duke looked toward the faint glow on the horizon where the river cut through the county like a black scar. "I go get her," Duke said. They moved fast after that. No speeches, no drama. Just Engines waking quietly again, bikes splitting into smaller groups, headlights kept low. Duke rode alone with two shadows behind him, Finch and Brick, tight and silent. As they neared the riverboat yard, the smell hit first. Diesel and wet wood and metal left too long in damp air. Floodlights stabbed the darkness between stacks of pallets and rusting shipping containers. Duke killed his engine behind a mound of scrap and crawled forward to the edge of the yard. He saw the vans first, two of them, doors open, men moving like they'd rehearsed. Then he saw her. Jenna, hands bound, hair stuck to her face, being dragged across gravel toward a dark vehicle. And beside the vehicle, under the harsh white light, stood Mayor Halden, hands in his pockets, smiling like this was a show he'd paid for. Duke's fingers tightened around the cold metal of the scrap pile as he watched Jenna stumble, lift her head, and her eyes scanned the yard like she could feel him there. Then the mayor leaned in close to her ear and pointed straight into the darkness where Duke was hiding. Duke didn't move. The mayor's finger stayed pointed into the dark, steady as a spotlight. Jenna's head turned with it, and for half a second, her eyes found the exact mound of scrap Duke was pressed behind. Not a full look, just a flicker, like she was touching him with her gaze. Jenna's lips moved without sound. Don't. Duke held his breath and watched Mayor Halden smile. Halden was shorter than Duke expected. Neat hair, clean jacket, hands in his pockets like he was waiting for valet service. The kind of man who'd shake your hand at a fundraiser and never once wonder where the money came from. Two men dragged Jenna by the arms. Her shoes scraped gravel. A cut on her temple had dried into a dark line down her cheek. But she was upright, alive, fighting the way she could by staying on her feet. A white box truck idled near Dock 3, back doors open. Inside was darkness and a dangling cargo strap swaying like a noose. Duke's jaw tightened. Brick crouched beside him, barely a shape in the darkness. Finch was a few yards back, eyes on the yard's power pole, hands already inside his tool pouch. Duke's headset was dead. No comms, too risky, too many scanners. So Duke did it the old way. He lifted two fingers, then tapped once on his chest. Brick nodded and slid away, low and silent, melting into stacked pallets. Finch shifted, watching Duke for the next signal. Halden said something into Jenna's ear. She flinched, then lifted her chin like she refused to give him that satisfaction. Halden chuckled and nodded toward the box truck. "Walk," one of the men growled. Jenna stumbled, caught herself, and took a step toward the open truck. Duke's vision narrowed. He was about to move, about to surge out of the darkness and turn this into exactly what they wanted, when a van rolled into the yard from the far gate. Black, tinted, too clean. Halden's smile widened as the van stopped under the floodlight. The side door slid open, and Mason Carter was shoved out onto the gravel. For 1 sick second, Duke couldn't make his brain accept it. Mason's wrists were zip-tied, his face was pale, eyes blown wide, hair messed like he'd been grabbed out of sleep. His shirt was the same one from the diner, now dirty at the shoulder, like someone had hauled him by the collar. He stumbled, caught himself, and his gaze snapped around the yard like an animal looking for a hole to run through. Then he saw Jenna. "Mom!" Mason screamed. Jenna made a broken sound and lunged forward. A man yanked her back by her bound arms. Halden lifted a hand lazily. "Easy, easy," he said, amused. "Nobody's running anywhere." Mason thrashed. "Let her go." A deputy stepped behind Mason and shoved him to his knees. Mason hit gravel hard, gasped, tried to push up. Halden walked over and crouched in front of him like they were having a private conversation. He spoke softly. Mason couldn't hear it, but Duke could see Mason's face change. Confusion, then horror, then rage that was too big for his small body. Halden stood and looked straight into the darkness again. "Duke Mercer," Halden called, voice carrying clean across the yard. "I know you're here." Duke stayed still. Halden smiled wider. "You're good," he said, like he respected it. "But you're not invisible." He nodded once. A floodlight on the far pole swung, beams slicing across scrap piles, sweeping the shadows. It crawled toward Duke's mound. Finch's head snapped up. His eyes met Duke's. Duke lifted his hand. Not yet. The beam hit the edge of Duke's cover, brightening the rusted metal inches from his face. Jenna's eyes found the light. She knew. She shook her head violently, tears shining. "Anything else? The kid goes in the river. Anything else? The kid goes in the river first." Mason's head jerked. What? Halden didn't even look at him. He just nodded at one of the men. The man lifted Mason by the back of his shirt and dragged him toward the dock edge. Mason kicked, scrambling, heels carving lines in gravel. "Stop!" Jenna screamed, raw. "Please!" Duke stepped out. He didn't rush. He didn't roar. He walked into the floodlight with his hands open and empty, palms forward. The yard snapped tight. Men shifted their weight. Rifles came up. A deputy near the containers muttered into his radio. Halden's smile didn't change. "There he is," he said softly. Jenna's eyes locked on Duke, wet and furious. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Mason's mouth fell open. "Duke?" he choked. Duke kept walking until he was 10 yards away, then stopped. "Mayor Halden," Duke said, voice even. "Let her go." Halden laughed lightly. "You're not in a position to make requests." Duke nodded toward Mason. "That's a child." Halden shrugged like the word didn't mean anything. "So is your reputation, and you've been very busy ruining mine." Duke's eyes flicked to the cameras mounted on poles, lenses pointed straight at him. "You're filming." Halden's smile sharpened. "You're performing." Duke didn't look away. "You set a trailer trap. You kidnapped a mother. You dragged a kid out here to bait me." Halden's voice stayed pleasant. "Allegations." Duke took a slow breath. "You want me? Take me." Halden's eyes glittered. "Oh, I will." He nodded again, and Deputy Klein stepped out from behind a container, face bruised from earlier, eyes bright with hate like he'd been waiting for this all night. "Klein," Duke said, flat. Klein sneered. "Look at you, Mr. Noble." Duke didn't give him anything. "Where were you when you took the boy?" Klein's smile twitched. "You mean when we rescued him from a biker clubhouse?" Mason shouted. "He didn't hurt me. They didn't." A hand clamped over Mason's mouth from behind. His words died into a muffled cry. Jenna bucked against her grip again. "Don't touch him!" Halden lifted a finger and Klein waved his men closer. "Cuff him," Klein ordered loud for the cameras. Duke didn't flinch. "You cuff me, you lose your shield." Halden tilted his head. "Do you think you're the shield?" Duke's gaze slid to Jenna. "I know what I am." Halden walked 2 steps closer, still keeping distance like he preferred other people's blood. "You know what Ray Mercer did to this county?" Halden asked casually. Mason's eyes snapped up at the name even through the hand on his mouth. Duke's voice didn't change. "Ray is dead." Halden's smile turned thin. "Dead men still have consequences." He nodded toward the box truck. "Put her in." One of the men shoved Jenna toward the open doors. She stumbled, caught herself, twisted to look at Mason. "Mason!" she cried, voice breaking. "Baby, don't look!" They hauled her up into the darkness. Mason screamed through the hand over his mouth, thrashing so hard the deputy holding him had to drag him closer to the dock edge. Duke's chest tightened. He kept his hands open, but his fingers flexed like they wanted to become fists. Halden watched it and looked satisfied. "Now," Halden said, "you're going to do exactly what I say." Duke's eyes stayed locked on the open truck. "First," Halden continued, "you're going to kneel, on camera." Duke didn't move. Halden's voice sharpened for the first time. "Second, you're going to tell your people to disappear. No more videos, no more reporters, no more heroic speeches." Duke met his gaze. "You can't unring a bell." Halden's expression hardened. "I can bury it," he gestured. One more shove and Mason would go in. One more shove and Mason would go in. Mason's eyes were huge, shining with terror. He looked at Duke like a child looks at the only adult left in a burning house. Duke felt the world go perfectly still. Finch, in the shadows, lifted his hand slightly, asking permission without words. Duke gave the smallest nod. Finch moved. A second later, every floodlight in the yard died at once. Darkness slammed down like a curtain. For half a heartbeat, there was nothing but the river and the sound of men sucking in surprised breath. Then, chaos erupted. Shouts, boots scraping, someone swearing as they collided in the dark. Duke moved fast. He sprinted straight toward the dock edge where Mason was, guided by the river smell and the shape of panic. He hit the deputy holding Mason with his shoulder, knocking him sideways without striking, then grabbed Mason by the shirt and hauled him back from the edge. Mason clung to him, sobbing, "Mom!" Brick appeared from the dark like a ghost and slammed into the men near the box truck, yanking Jenna's captor backward. Jenna spilled out of the truck doorway, half falling, and Brick caught her under the arms. Somebody fired. The muzzle flash lit the yard for an instant, white, blinding. Duke saw Halden's face in that flash, twisted with fury. He saw Klein's arm extended, he saw Jenna's eyes widen, and he heard the shot tear the night apart. The muzzle flash blinked out and the yard dropped back into darkness so thick it felt like hands over eyes. Jenna's scream cut through it. "Mason!" Mason's fingers dug into Duke's vest. Clinging so hard, Duke felt the fabric stretch. Duke pulled him tight, one arm around the boy's chest, turning his body sideways to shield him as boots pounded gravel and men shouted into the black. "Lights! Get the lights!" Klein yelled. Somebody slammed into Duke's shoulder. Duke didn't swing. He shifted, planted his feet, and shoved back with his forearm, keeping Mason behind him. Brick had Jenna. Duke could hear her, ragged breaths, stumbling steps, Brick's low voice. "Move. Move now." Another shot cracked, not aimed, panicked. The flash lit the dock for a split second, and Duke saw exactly what he needed to see. Mayor Halden gripping Klein's arm, dragging his gun hand down like even Halden understood Klein was about to ruin everything. Then the flash died again. Duke moved. He didn't charge the mayor. He didn't chase Klein. He did what Jenna told him to do. He got the kid out. "Riverside!" Duke barked, voice low and commanding. "Follow the pilings!" Mason was shaking so hard, his teeth chattered against Duke's chest. "Mom, she's coming," Duke said, and he didn't look back because looking back was how you got baited into dying. They ran along the dock edge where the wood was slick, Duke's boots slamming boards, Mason stumbling, Duke half carrying him. The river below was black and loud, slapping pilings like it was cheering for whoever survived. Behind them, the yard erupted, men colliding, someone yelling, "I got him," and another voice screaming, "That's not him," because in the dark everyone looked like guilt. Then, as sudden as a switch, the floodlights snapped back on, white light slammed down over everything, and the scene froze in a way that made Duke's blood turn colder than the river. They'd been waiting for the lights to return, not to see, to record. Cameras on poles, dash rigs, phones in hands, every lens aimed at Duke and the boy in his arms like a headline coming true. Mason blinked hard under the glare, face streaked with tears, wrists still zip-tied. Jenna was 3 yards behind them now, on her knees in gravel, Brick's arm wrapped around her shoulders. Her hands were still bound, but she was alive. Her eyes were locked on Mason like she was willing him back into her body. Mayor Halden stood by the box truck with his hands out, palms open, as if he was the calm adult in a dangerous situation. Klein was half behind him, gun still up, breath heaving, eyes shining with hate. Halden raised his voice, smooth for the cameras. "Put the child down, Duke. This doesn't need to get worse." Duke didn't move. He kept Mason pressed to him and stared at Halden like he was seeing the devil in a suit. "You dragged a kid out here," Duke said, loud enough for every mic to catch. "You threatened to throw him in the river," Halden smiled faintly. "Allegations." Jenna's voice ripped through the yard, raw and shaking. "He took my son. He took him from the clubhouse. He put a hand over his mouth." Klein spun toward her. "Shut up!" Halden lifted a hand like a conductor calming an orchestra. "Jenna," he said, gentle, "you're confused. You've been through a lot." Jenna sobbed once, then forced her voice steady, the way she did when she had to be strong for Mason. "I'm not confused. I recorded you." Halden's smile twitched. The first crack. Duke saw it and leaned into the opening like a blade. "Tell them what you recorded," Duke said to Jenna, loud. Halden's eyes hardened. "Don't." Jenna's breath shook. "Roots, money, the riverboat yard, the mayor's men talking about shipments, the sheriff taking envelopes." Halden's voice stayed calm, but now it had steel in it. "Klein, end it." Klein lifted the gun, face tight, and aimed, past Duke, past Mason, toward Jenna. Mason screamed, "No!" Duke's body moved without thought. He turned, shifting Mason behind his shoulder, making himself the wall between Klein and Jenna. Klein's finger tightened, and a new voice thundered across the yard, louder than any loudspeaker Grady had used all night. "Federal agents! Drop the weapon! Now!" Vehicles surged through the open gate like a wave. Unmarked SUVs, headlights blasting, doors flying open. Men and women in vests poured out with rifles up, Not screaming, not panicking, moving like a machine that had been waiting for a single trigger to be pulled. Halden's face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. He stepped back half a pace without meaning to. Klein's gun wavered. A second command, sharper, closer. "Drop it!" Klein hesitated, long enough to prove he'd chosen wrong the second he lifted it. A single shot cracked, clean, controlled. Klein's gun flew out of his hand, clattering across gravel. He screamed, clutching his forearm, dropping to his knees. No one fired again. The yard filled with shouted orders, boots, metal clicks as cuffs came out. Halden turned to run. He made it 2 steps before 2 agents slammed him down face first into gravel, pinning his arms behind him. His suit jacket tore. His perfect hair got dirt in it. His mouth opened to protest, and an agent's voice cut him off like a gate closing. "You are under arrest," the agent said. "Don't talk." Halden's eyes, wild now, found Duke for a split second. Hate, not at being caught, at losing control of the story. A second group of agents swarmed the box truck. The door slammed shut from inside. Someone shouted, "Clear!" Another shouted, "Secondary, watch for traps!" The air was tense with the knowledge that these people booby-trapped trailers for fun. Jenna shook under Brick's arm. "Mason," she whispered. Duke knelt, hands still open, careful, and lowered Mason to his feet without letting go. Mason wobbled, then ran, zip-tied wrists and all, straight into Jenna's arms. Jenna wrapped herself around him like she was trying to crawl inside his ribs. She sobbed into his hair. Mason sobbed back, face buried against her neck, making sounds he'd been holding in all day. "I thought," Mason gasped, "I thought they—" Jenna rocked him, shaking her head. "No, no, I'm here, I'm here." An agent approached Duke, scanning him quickly. "You Duke Mercer?" Duke lifted both hands a little higher. "Yeah." The agent's eyes flicked over the cameras on poles, the dash rigs, the phones on the ground, then to Lenz, who'd emerged from the darkness with his chest cam still blinking. "You have footage?" the agent asked. Duke nodded once. "Everything. Trailer trap, bridge, this yard, names." The agent's jaw tightened. "Good." Duke's eyes stayed on Jenna and Mason. "Where's Sheriff Grady?" The agent's gaze slid to the far side of the yard, where another team was dragging a heavy man in a vest from behind a container. Grady's face red, furious, still trying to shout over everyone like volume could rewrite reality. Grady saw Duke and snapped, "This is a county matter." An agent shoved him against the side of a van and cuffed him hard enough to make the metal ring. "No, it's not," the agent said. "Not anymore." Grady's shouting turned into a strangled noise. Duke exhaled slowly, like his lungs had been locked all night. Jenna looked up at Duke over Mason's head, eyes wet and burning. "They took him," she whispered. "They took him right out of that room. They told me you were dead. They told me you'd—" "I know," Duke said. Jenna's mouth trembled. "I didn't want him to see any of this." Duke's gaze dropped to Mason, still clinging to Jenna like he'd fall apart if he let go. "He didn't," Duke said quietly. "Not the worst of it." Jenna swallowed, nodding once like that mattered more than anything. One of the agents stepped between them, professional but not cruel. "Ma'am, we need your statement, and we need the recording you mentioned." Jenna's hands were still bound. An agent cut the zip ties and she rubbed her wrists, wincing. She looked at Duke, then at Mason. "The recording is on a drive," she said. "I left it. Duke has it." Duke patted his vest pocket once. "Copied 3 times, he said. "One already with a reporter, Lena Brooks." The agent's eyebrows rose. "You already contacted media?" Duke didn't flinch. "Your world moves slow without pressure." The agent stared at him for a beat, then nodded like he couldn't argue with results. "Smart." Mason finally pulled back from Jenna's neck and looked at Duke like he was seeing him for the first time. You came because of me?" Mason whispered. Duke's throat worked. He glanced at Jenna, and Jenna looked away like she'd been carrying a weight for years and it had finally cracked her spine. Duke crouched in front of Mason again, keeping his voice low, away from agents and cameras and chaos. "I came because your mom asked me to," Duke said, "and because your dad, Ray, he mattered to me." Mason's eyes filled again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was something sharp and aching and new. "My dad was real," Mason whispered. Duke nodded once. "He was." Mason swallowed hard. "Did he Did he love me? Jenna made a small broken sound behind him. Duke held Mason's gaze. Yeah, he said. He did. Mason's lips trembled. He wanted more answers, more time, more proof. Duke didn't give him a speech. He did something better. He reached into his vest and pulled out the folded note Jenna had written. He didn't hand it to Mason yet. He handed it to Jenna. Not here, Duke said quietly. Not in front of cameras. Jenna nodded, clutching it like it was oxygen. An agent walked up again. We're moving you two to a safe location, he said to Jenna and Mason. Now. Jenna tightened her arm around Mason. Mason's head snapped up in panic. No, don't take us. The agent raised both hands. We're not the sheriff, he said firmly. You're witnesses, and you're in danger. Duke stood. They go with Raven, he said. The agent looked at him. Who's Raven? Duke turned and spotted her at the yard edge, helmet off, face streaked with dirt, eyes scanning like she expected another trap to spring. She had the young deputy beside her, shaking, and Caleb Rudd sitting on the ground with his hands on his head like he couldn't believe he was still alive. Duke pointed. Her, she's clean. The agent hesitated. Then he nodded once. Fine. But they're under federal protection. You understand? Duke didn't blink. I understand. Jenna stepped toward Raven with Mason pressed to her side. Raven knelt and opened her arms, and Mason, after a second, let Raven pull him close too, like he'd run out of places to put his trust and had to build a new one in real time. As Jenna and Mason were escorted out, Mason looked back at Duke. Duke lifted 2 fingers to his forehead in a small salute, then dropped his hand. No smile, no performance, just a promise. 2 days later, Bell's Diner had a new security camera over the back office door. 3, actually. The town had been forced to watch itself on video. A staged trailer trap, a bridge handoff, a mayor smiling while a child knelt on gravel. People had opinions. People had excuses. People had suddenly always suspected Halden. None of it mattered. What mattered was Mason's table. It was back on the sidewalk in the exact same spot. The folding table no longer wobbly because someone had tightened the screws. The chairs were clean. The sign was new, written in bold black marker on poster board. Happy birthday, Mason. Mason sat at the head of it with Jenna beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder like she would never let go again. A real cake sat in front of him, bigger than his head, candles crowded together like a small city of light. And across the street, engines rumbled, soft, respectful, steady. Not 1 bike, not 10. A line that stretched down Main Street until you couldn't see the end. 400 Harleys idling in the sunset like thunder that had finally chosen the right house. Duke stepped up to the table and set something down beside Mason's plate. A folded letter. And a small patch, old, worn at the edges, stitched with a name. Ray. Mason stared at it, breath held. Duke didn't tell him what to feel. He just nodded toward the candles. Go on, Duke said quietly. This time you don't blow it out alone. Mason looked at Jenna. Jenna nodded through tears. Mason inhaled, cheeks puffed, and blew until every flame vanished at once, and the street filled with cheering and the low, beautiful rumble of engines that felt like family.